Unfortunately, you were too proud. You thought you could face me and win, Lord Voldemort said, voice arrogant as ever, his hands spread wide. I am invincible. He already saw victory in his mind. Tell me, John, how do I open the Holy Grail? He demanded. John only smiled, calm and untroubled as he watched Voldemort's solo performance. The Holy Grail? You want it? He said lightly. You'll need your soul for that, Tom. Voldemort stared. John continued, steady as a metronome. The key to opening it is your soul. Like the foolish things you've done before. You haven't forgotten, have you? A remnant soul, and yet you think it will grant you eternal life? John raised the silver-veined sword above his head and sneered. You can dream on. Above them, a dark dome had been drawn across the sky, studded with stars that were not merely lights but moving points. One by one, the brightest 9 stars shifted until they aligned in a single straight line, a constellation conjunction. John's left hand rotated a wand until a closed Mobius strip of magic spun into being. His right hand's blade drank in the starlight. Wings burst from his back, channeling the power of the constellation through him. Chaotic light flickered in his eyes. The world around him snapped into black and white. In matters of taboo, he said coldly, I have gone farther than you. Tom, John roared. A sharp crack sounded near Voldemort's ear. When Voldemort looked down, a hound had materialized at his side, jaws full of jagged, metallic teeth, and it bit into his ankle as if its fangs were alloy. Pain lanced through him. Voldemort flung the beast away and found, to his alarm, that John had folded the golden Mobius strip into a closed domain. No matter where he strode, he kept returning to the same point, trapped in a time loop like a lantern on a pivot. Time magic? Voldemort had once wanted to master it, but for all his knowledge of the dark arts, time had never been his forte. John's command of it far surpassed him. The strain broke John's wand in his hand. Among the fragments, a silver-white shard of soul, threaded with gold and silver, hovered. John gripped his sword with both hands. His pupils were vertical slits like a dragon's. Wandering remnant soul, returned to its master, an ancient whisper intoned. The drifting soul shard was sucked into the silver-veined blade. Voldemort felt an invisible force clamp down on him, a binding he could not shake. With a soul as the conduit, even Voldemort could not prevent that fragment's return to his body. John's life force drained rapidly, his black hair whipped white. The constellation's power poured into the blade, and the red Philosopher's Stone set in its hilt transmuted that energy into magic John could wield. Tom, you cannot escape this sword. John lifted his twin swords like a reaper's scythe. The sight was blinding, glorious. Trapped in the time loop, Voldemort scrambled for any escape. His wand lashed out in furious spells against the domain. When that failed, he conjured over 100 silver shields to surround himself as a last refuge. John closed his eyes. The silver-veined sword traced a soft, silver arc through the air. Soul, return. A sword forged of remnant soul and time cut through the defenses. The 100 shields were bypassed as if they meant nothing. John had crossed taboos. He had gone where others feared to tread. The strike itself was featherlight and silent. There was no cataclysmic rupture for Harry to witness, only the dreamlike Mobius domain folding into glittering gold dust and scattering. The silver shields winked out. Voldemort stared at his hands, stunned. A wind stirred. Harry felt it against his face. John still held his sword raised. His hair had already gone white. The gust pushed Voldemort's body. A dark red vein bloomed across his chest, a bleeding line that marked the approach of death. Horrified, Voldemort watched it lengthen and throb. In that haze, he thought he saw a figure in black not far off. Then, inexplicably, the dark line stopped. The sudden reprieve raced through his mind like lightning. Voldemort's face contorted with relief and calculation. He had a way to live. He lifted his wand, voice high and crazed, and spoke each syllable as if spat with hatred. 100 Ghosts' Night Parade. On the edge of death, Voldemort chose to transmute himself into something monstrous. Under the spell's influence, he forcibly reshaped his soul. John, spent of magic, drained of time and constellation and soul, could not lift a finger. He watched as Voldemort's soul turned black. His sword slipped from numb fingers and struck the ground. Ha! Voldemort laughed like a broken thing. You should have aimed for my head. You used my soul against me, he sneered, and in the old days I would have died for it. It's a pity you forgot one thing. With John incapacitated, Voldemort spread his hands and raved, a fevered gleam in his eyes. Do you know why I started the war this year? Because of love. Yes, love, he cried, answering himself, and turned his gaze to Harry. Harry's confusion hardened into disbelief. Love from Lily Potter. Impossible, Harry shouted, pupils wide with shock. Voldemort, pushed beyond all limits to evade a killing blow, laughed. Have you forgotten, Savior? My body contains your blood, and with it the magic carried by your mother. Memories surged back. Voldemort had resurrected using Harry's blood. The truth landed like a physical blow. Voldemort shared a strand of Harry's bloodline. Lily's protective magic clung to that blood. It had shielded Harry in his childhood. And now, by some cruel twist, John had used Voldemort's own soul as the medium of attack. Everything had conspired against John. Coincidence, fate, old magic. Voldemort exulted. Dumbledore was right. Love can transcend death. It was the bitterest irony. The man who had trampled love now claimed its protection. The Dark Lord is eternal, Voldemort shouted, venom and triumph in his voice. And the Dark Lord's so-called nemesis is nothing but a stepping stone. Harry felt the weight of despair crush him. If neither Dumbledore nor John could stop Voldemort now, who could? Chapter 482, Savior? Harry ground his teeth, pushed himself to his feet, and ran to John's side. He raised his wand. Lord Voldemort watched him with a sneer. Still dreaming of being the savior, are you? No, Harry said, drawing a breath. I just want to protect Hogwarts. John looked at him, surprised Harry had stepped forward. Then, unnervingly calm, he said, There's no savior needed here, Harry. Move. John, you can't. You'll die, Harry protested. He couldn't bear the thought of John being killed. He was still too young. John barely shook his head. He braced himself and lifted his gaze to Lord Voldemort, who was preparing to finish them all. Arch-nemesis? John said quietly. Lord Voldemort, I think you've misunderstood something. From the dim, lightless darkness behind the Dark Lord, a figure stepped forward. I have never, from beginning to end, been the arch-nemesis of your prophecy, the newcomer said. John chuckled. Your arch-nemesis, you forgot. Those two boys. Like some grim echo of the first year, Voldemort's defenses were shattered. Neville stood there holding a dark golden sword, muscles straining. The blade, humming with demon-slaying power, cut through the air and through the thing that stood before them as surely as 100 specters in the night. For my old friends, for the Constellation Society, for my king, Neville roared. I will kill you, Tom Riddle. He drove the sword home with both hands. The tip plunged into Voldemort's chest. Dark blood splattered. The blade pierced straight through, impaling him. Neville kicked him, and the black robe that cloaked the Dark Lord seemed to drain of color and substance. Voldemort could not believe it. He had no love left to protect him now. Having let himself become a thing of shadow and cruelty, he had lost any claim to being loved. The Boy of July, Neville Longbottom, the one who, in the prophecy, might have stood against him, had become the weapon. The true arch-nemesis of the Dark Lord was not Harry Potter alone. It was the Constellation Society. Tom Riddle was sent staggering backward, his remaining hand splayed, the narrow pupils of his red eyes rolling upward. He fell, limp and twitching like any mortal, blood loss and weakness wrapping him in fear. He reached desperately toward the mirror. John had not lied. Voldemort's soul was the key. In the mirror, a golden holy grail shimmered into sight. With the raw, animal will to survive, Voldemort reached for the thing he had pursued his whole life. Closer, closer, he hissed, a smile of triumph beginning to curve his pale lips. But a faint voice carried to him. I forgot to tell you, I transplanted the curse from the opal necklace that killed 19 muggles onto it. The smile froze on Voldemort's face. What he thought was salvation was in fact a deadlier trap. The Grail bore a curse he had never expected. John collapsed backward, flat on his back. As Voldemort's fingers brushed the Grail, the transplanted curse activated. The arrogant Dark Lord turned to ash, his physical body scattering like embers on the wind. Only his soul remained, and before the Grail a door opened, a door only John could see. Pain flared in John's palm, the sign that the contract had been fulfilled. The soul shrieked as chains pierced it, a sound so terrible it made Neville steady himself to keep from falling. No matter how the black soul struggled, it could not break free. John pushed himself up and stared at the cloaked figure tied by those spectral chains. I think our deal is done, he said. Only he could see the other visitor. Death, as promised, had come to take the soul. Death regarded John with an intensity that was almost amused. "You are the boldest person I have ever met," Death said. "The transaction is complete," John replied. "I will keep my promise." "Remember," Death warned as he bound the Dark Lord's essence and drew it away, "those who toy with me do not end well." Despite Voldemort's struggles, Death paid them no heed. The body, already ash, finally disappeared. John stood where Death had been and watched until the place where Death had been melted back into nothing. He was still shaken. Even Lord Voldemort had been helpless before that presence. These were the rules of the magical world, and the completion of the bargain had brought back an old friend. The Holy Grail pulsed, and the soul within it began to take on shape. John drew an emerald bottle from his small bag, tipped it open, and swallowed the potion. His spent magic crept back into him. While he waited for it to return fully, he began to laugh, first quietly, then louder, a wild, helpless sound. He laughed until he was exhausted, until he fell back onto the cold ground and lay there, ignoring the mud and dust, laughing with the uncontained relief of a boy. Harry watched him, stunned by the change. Neville came over, the sword still in his hands. "We did it, right?" he asked, though the fearlessness he'd had moments ago had gone. He looked strangely careful, as if afraid a dream might shatter. "Of course," John said, lying back and staring up at the stars with a smile. "Of course we did." 2 years had passed, from the first rumors of death, through their maneuvers at the Ministry, through failure and regrouping. 2 long years of scheming and sacrifice. John had played every card he had, and now his plan had paid off. He could not maintain his usual calm anymore. Exhaustion and exhilaration made him young and raw again. Seeing him relax, Neville allowed himself a genuine smile and then, spent, lay down too. The door to the Constellation Society opened, and the members poured in. The maze behind them had been nearly destroyed in the battle. They hurried toward the glowing grail. "Where's Lord Voldemort?" Draco asked uncertainly. Neville walked forward, eyes brimming with tears, and stepped up to the Holy Grail. The soul inside it was growing more solid by the heartbeat. Tears streamed down faces around him. Percy stood stunned. Fleur pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her sobs. And Cedric trembled as he murmured, "It's done. It's done." Chapter 483. This time, they were not late. Daphne threw herself into John's arms. Draco reached out, signaling that Astoria could come and cry, but Fleur intercepted her and took her in her arms instead. Above the dome, the stars glittered. The Holy Grail slowly rose, gold and silver braided together. John had mostly recovered. Daphne helped him to his feet. "Come on," she urged. "Let's go find our friend." Harry stepped back silently. He knew it was time to leave this to the others. This was a historic moment for the magical world. An unbreakable rule, one no one had ever defied, was about to be turned from impossible to possible by a group of young people. The members of the Constellation Society gathered around the Holy Grail. John took Daphne's wand and tapped the Grail. The opals set into it fell away. He reached out, cradled the Grail in his palm, and looked down. Heinrich Edgar's soul still lay quiet within. Now only one step remained. They exchanged glances and walked out of the Constellation Society. At Hogwarts, the students' battle had ended. Minister Barty, Old Barty, personally led the Ministry team. In the Forbidden Forest, the centaurs who'd stayed neutral until now had finally joined the fight, likely sensing the tide turning and fearing later blame. With their leader dead, the giants had no reason to keep fighting. Dragons had slaughtered the dark creatures before Aurors finished them off. After Voldemort's death, the remaining Inferi lost whatever spark had animated them and became true corpses. The war wound down. The conflict that had begun with Voldemort's rise turned to dust with his fall. Snape helped the Ministry apprehend the remaining dark wizards. The Ministry earned considerable credit this time, but there were no reporters. Old Barty paced anxiously in front of the 9 doors that had appeared. Not just him, uninjured Hogwarts students gathered as well. They waited for a final answer. One of the doors opened. Harry stepped through, clearly surprised by what he saw outside. Hermione and Ron rushed up, frantic. Harry's expression was complicated as he said, "Voldemort is dead." Silence fell over Hogwarts, then erupted into cheers. Everyone cheered at the news of Voldemort's death. Seamus shouted excitedly, Did you do it? Did you defeat him? No, Harry said, shaking his head. John and Neville did it. I didn't do anything. The title of Savior fell from Harry's shoulders in that moment. A new savior had emerged. Seamus hesitated. He'd assumed Harry and John would have defeated Voldemort together, but he hadn't expected another name. Neville was their housemate, but he'd never been prominent in Gryffindor. The change stunned everyone. Another door opened. All eyes turned, Snape's and Dumbledore's included. A head of white hair came into view. Hermione's eyes widened at the sight. Snape's face was unreadable. Dumbledore let out a long sigh. The werewolves bowed their heads. The giants knelt. For a moment, Hogwarts held its breath. John walked out of the Constellation Society surrounded by his friends, the Holy Grail in his hand. His gaze was steady and reverent as he walked in a single direction. Everyone wanted to know where he was going, so they followed in silence. The procession grew. From the original 9, it swelled until much of Hogwarts trailed behind him. They walked through the night until the sky began to pale with the first hint of dawn. John and the others reached the place where sunrise could be seen, the island in the center of the lake. This was where the boy born of darkness had been buried. As if sensing what John intended, everyone held their breath. John took Daphne's laurelwood wand and bowed, scooping up a handful of the damp dawn soil. He kneaded it carefully, letting the cool earth stain his fingers, then looked toward the yet unrisen sun and murmured, "The sunrise is beautiful today. You should wake to see it." He stood and looked at the familiar faces around him. Gin Lettisley, Neville Longbottom, Percy Weasley, Fleur Delacour, Draco Malfoy, Cedric Diggory, Daphne Greengrass, Astoria Greengrass, friends bound by hope and loyalty. One bond had shifted, but that did not matter now. John waved his wand. The tombstone cracked and split. The earth parted to either side, and a crystal coffin rose slowly from the ground. The body inside still looked like a sleeping youth, but John knew appearances could be deceiving. To restore him fully, this last rite was necessary. As the crystal coffin emerged, Snape realized what John intended. So did old Barty. Their faces registered shock. They understood that John was about to do something the magical world forbade. John released the Holy Grail. It hovered over the crystal coffin without a breeze. Golden liquid, the life-giving draught, poured slowly from the Grail. The crystal coffin took on a golden glow. Sacred light spread out. The body, charred by fiendfire, began to mend. The Grail purified the curses embedded in the flesh. Color returned. John stepped forward. The members of the Constellation Society closed in around the coffin, joined hands, and offered their most fervent prayers. John moved his wand once more. The crystal coffin crumbled into dust. The body rose, suspended in the air. John sliced the palm of the body and let blood well out. Then he cut his own palm and mixed his blood with the other. He gathered the mingled blood in his hands and murmured an ancient invocation. "Come back, Heinrich." Chapter 505, Body Reshaped. Dawn breaks blood to blood. They fused, an unbreakable bond forming. His magic resonated with the Holy Grail. Ancient murmurs issued from it in a language so old no one present could understand. Chapter 484. The king's blood flowed. The blood of an old friend boiled. Magic hummed in the Holy Grail while the Constellation Society chanted blessings in silence. Daphne removed Ravenclaw's diadem, and John tapped it lightly with his wand. A pure, silver-white soul rose from the diadem. As John whispered, those souls braided themselves into silver threads and drew forth the spirit trapped in the Holy Grail. "Come back, Heinrich." John linked himself to everyone's thoughts, and those thoughts became power, ties that bound the Constellation Society together. Before dawn, they funneled thought into blood, fused soul to blood. It was an ancient kind of magic, emotion given form, nearly like love. They forged a gem of blood, soul, and thought. "Soul, return!" Light burst from the gem, and John poured it into Heinrich's body. Golden liquid reshaped the cursed flesh. The sands of time flowed backward. Under the watching eyes, the corpse ignited in golden flame as soul and body reunited. The body shrank, reversing the corruption until it was a newborn wrapped in shining liquid. The infant opened his mouth as the sun eased above the horizon. His first cry split the pre-dawn. Dark golden eyes blinked, bewildered. Everyone stared. Malfoy blurted, "Is he going to grow up from a baby? Who's going to be his father?" Daphne slapped him hard, and even John shot Malfoy a glare. He wasn't the man to abandon Heinrich to infancy. This is because of time, John said without a trace of humor. He raised his left hand and a golden magic circle rippled into being in his palm. He looked at the infant and said, "My deputy, good morning." Under the flow of that golden time, the child aged before their eyes from infant to toddler to child to teenager until he stopped at 16, the age he'd been before the last 2 years. Dark golden eyes reflected the dawn. "Welcome back, Heinrich." John reached for him. Blurred memories clung to Heinrich's face. Instinct made him reach for John's hand. A layer of clothing formed around him. When John pulled him upright, Heinrich's expression steadied, and a smile broke over his face as he gripped the offered hand like one grasping light. "I'm back, my king." That voice, that presence, Heinrich Edgar, the light chaser, was truly back. Everyone who watched had witnessed a miracle that outshone even magic itself. And the Holy Grail. John swept his gaze across the crowd and lifted his wand. Reducto. A charged white beam struck the Grail. The relic trembled, flared with a blinding radiance, and then dimmed. It fell from the air. The Philosopher's Stone inside disintegrated to dust. John casually plucked up Helga Hufflepuff's cup with a fingertip. "This thing is useless now, but it's a commemorative collectible." He tossed the golden cup to a stunned Harry. "Consider it my personal donation to the school display." Harry caught the cup, but the gesture brought no joy. Dumbledore would not live. The old man had reached the end of his road. While the Constellation Society celebrated, the Order of the Phoenix braced for the final chapter of their old leader. John walked over to old Barty with a smile. "I believe you will be the most successful minister of magic in 100 years. Barty Crouch looked at the cup in Harry's hands, sighed, and said, "You are clever, presenting a miracle for all to see, then forcibly retracting it." John had destroyed the Holy Grail in public to leave no lingering fantasies. A thing that could bring the dead back so easily would become the obsession of the whole world. John, as its holder, would have become a target. By destroying it, he cut off any hope that people might chase, and the battle was over. Across the wizarding world, other stories were already turning. Ludwig Edgar, newly appointed principal of Durmstrang, ended an exhausting day. His appointment had satisfied the school board and the wishes of others, the ancient Edgar line, the king's deputy. Between the reemergence of Grindelwald and the rise of Lord Voldemort, the family had been thrust back into the public eye. The ministry's surveillance and the malice and prejudice that came with it weighed on him. Only at home could Ludwig finally let down his guard. Passing his ancestral chamber, he stopped. The butler almost ran into him. Ludwig stood motionless before the room that held the family portraits. Most of the paintings here were cloaked in shadow since Heinrich's death. Only Ludwig's own portrait had stayed bright. Once there had been 3 vibrant paintings. Now only one remained. Ludwig had avoided this room since Heinrich died. Today he walked in. He paused in front of a portrait that had somehow ignited with life again. For the first time in a long while, the man who could remain calm amid ruin broke. "You are back." His voice trembled as he reached out and brushed the painting, a sob threading through it. In the portrait, Heinrich Edgar smiled, radiant light playing around him. The light he had chased at last shone into the Edgar room. Headlines erupted across newspapers and screens. Misunderstanding. Minister Crouch personally went to the battlefield and annihilated Lord Voldemort's followers in one fell swoop. Barty Crouch's approval rating soars, becoming the greatest minister of magic in a century. A tense and exciting game, Hogwarts invaded, Ministry of Magic reveals its true colors. Shocking, Lord Voldemort dies, ending the panic. John Wick, who is he? The Holy Grail, bringing the dead back to life. The iron law of the magical world is broken. Johnny Silverhand commits heinous crimes and disappears in Neon. Destroying the Magic Institute, Johnny Silverhand's brutality is appalling. Neon wizards accuse Johnny Silverhand. Old Barty indeed rode a wave of support. His earlier incompetence was explained away as strategy, bait to lure Voldemort into the Ministry's trap. On the final day at Hogwarts, reporters swarmed. Filch grumbled as he chased them from the ruined gates. The most extraordinary fact about the battle was that Hogwarts' death toll was 0. Even the Hufflepuff student who had been swallowed by a vampiric beast was dug out alive, merely unconscious inside the beast's stomach. It suggested some subtle power had protected the castle. Dumbledore had his own suspicions. Is it you, John? Only John could have done this. Or more precisely, the power of John's Holy Grail had encompassed the entire school. Chapter 485, The Holy Grail, the artifact that could heal, rejuvenate, even grant immortality, had been keeping every student safe. It couldn't last any longer, Dumbledore said with a tired sigh. Its power is completely drained. At Hogwarts, the Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance recorded every pupil's name. Both objects were kept in the headmaster's office. Using the book and the quill, John had woven a protective ward over the whole school. The amount of magic that required was unimaginable. Only something as potent as the Holy Grail could have borne it. John had been going to the headmaster's office frequently in his 6th year, not just out of curiosity, but to use magic beyond Slughorn's notice. Even if the Grail hadn't been shattered, it wouldn't have held much longer. But destroying it openly carried its own consequences. Like old Barty had seen for himself, John had given up immortality within reach, and that sacrifice earned him trust. Dumbledore coughed, spitting black blood. His time was short. Mourning settled over Hogwarts. The relief that followed victory had already been replaced by dread. This was all they could still do for the old man. Dumbledore was fortunate, in a way. He would die having guarded the school and having seen it preserved through the war. Members of the Order of the Phoenix gathered around him. Mrs. Weasley leaned into Mr. Weasley. He put an arm around her. Tonks and Lupin held hands tightly. "How are you, Albus?" Slughorn asked, the potion master scrutinizing the old man's condition. Dumbledore's right hand was blackened. The Phoenix had not risen from the ashes. Voldemort's curse was eating him away. He had fought to protect Hogwarts and yet had not been spared. Dumbledore managed a kind, small smile. "Very well, Horace," he said. Seeing the students safe meant everything to him. Sirius bowed his head, unable to watch the old man fade. "We've won, Dumbledore," Kingsley said. "The Ministry has captured all the wizards who invaded Hogwarts." "Yes, we've won," Dumbledore replied weakly. "Lord Voldemort is dead." Mrs. Weasley buried her face in her husband's arm. This was the man who'd been headmaster since their school days. He'd watched them all grow up. Moody had arrived and looked sorrowful. Snape and Slughorn had examined Dumbledore together. Both had reached the same conclusion. The old wizard would die. The birth of one life required the passing of another. "Dumbledore!" Harry stumbled into the foyer and froze at the sight of him. The old man had never been like this. The room reeked of the aura of death. Harry couldn't accept it and wept openly. Hermione and Ron came in and gathered at Dumbledore's side. "Albus, I don't think I'm cut out to be a headmaster," Slughorn said, grief heavy. "You did very well," Dumbledore soothed. "You stayed with the school until the very end." Watching the children grow, isn't that wonderful? The old man's kindness and gentle wit remained, even on the brink of death. It was a contrast to Voldemort. The Dark Lord would have clung to life. Dumbledore accepted his fate quietly. Professor McGonagall rushed in, covering her mouth, tears in her eyes. More people arrived, the Weasleys. Bill, Charlie, Fred, and George, Ginny, Snape, Flitwick, Sprout. Hagrid came in, armor clanging as he took it off, dabbing his nose with a spotted handkerchief. Harry stood numb, holding Helga Hufflepuff's cup. "Harry?" Hermione asked, worried. "I'm fine," he forced out. Dumbledore's eyes began to close. The weeping grew louder. The end was near. Harry fought the tears until light from outside cut across the foyer and touched the cup in his hands. Something inside the cup gleamed, a golden droplet clinging to the bottom. Hermione leaned forward. "Harry, the cup!" she cried. Harry looked down. At the very bottom of Helga Hufflepuff's cup, a golden liquid clung like a final reserve, the last of the Holy Grail's potion. Gold, like a shard of hope. Then text appeared as if from nowhere. "Ding, achievement unlocked, traitor with gods." Traitor with gods, a wanderer on the edge of life and death, a negotiator with taboos, a hidden one from beyond the borders. John felt the achievement notification as well, a strange blessing blooming in his chest. It reminded him of another title, Soul Walker. He rubbed his chin, only to feel a sharp pinch on his ear. His mother's right hand was pinching his ear, her left was squeezing Watson's. Mrs. Wick's eyes flashed with anger. "Why didn't you tell me you caused such a commotion at school?" she demanded. Watson let out a yelp as she tightened her grip. John looked to his uncle, Seriosha, pleading. Seriosha cleared his throat. "Ah, let me say. Out!" Mrs. Wick snapped. Seriosha slunk away, muttering to himself about being the eldest but not the one in charge. John gave up on the adults and took control of his own defense. "Mom, listen to my explanation." He was sweating now. He'd worded that poorly when he said sophistry earlier and corrected himself out loud. "I didn't realize it would be such a big deal. I had to take a leave of absence for a while." "You took a leave?" Mrs. Wick's look made his scalp prickle. She had once snapped a banshee's neck without blinking. "Why?" "It was set up. I had no choice but to leave," John said. "Don't listen to him," Watson snapped. "John hasn't explained why an owl turned into a dragon." Mrs. Wick tightened her grip on Watson's ear. "Shut up," she hissed through anger and tears. Then she softened and rubbed John's head, turning away from Watson in an unreasonable fury. Watson simply took it. He knew his wife wouldn't really hurt their son, so he bore her wrath. John slipped free of his mother's hold and noticed members of the Constellation Society trying not to laugh. He snapped, "Stop laughing." Malfoy snorted. "You're afraid of your mom." 3 seconds later, Malfoy was hanging upside down from a tree. John had done it. Laughter died off at once. John handed the wand back to Daphne. "Your wand is unusually smooth for casting Incarcerus," he said, admiring how cleanly the spell had gone. Daphne smiled. "I thought so too." Only Malfoy had been hurt, exactly the outcome John wanted. "Heinrich, how do you feel?" John asked with a grin. "After sleeping for 2 years?" "Good," Heinrich said, studying Kin, who now towered over him. After a moment he added, half to himself, "How did he get so much taller than me?" "That's what growing up does," John said, spreading his hands helplessly. 2 years have passed. Kin was back to being his sunny, cheerful self, golden hair catching the light, his grin bright. "You really need to rest," he chided, reaching out to ruffle Heinrich's hair like an older brother. Heinrich dodged with an irritated look. "I don't remember agreeing to any trip." "You can't just turn your back on me," Kin protested, mock hurt. "I even dropped out of school for you, and you treat me like this." Heinrich's brows drew together. Cedric nudged Percy and murmured, "I just saw your brother looking for Fleur." She gave him the cold shoulder. Percy sighed, rubbing his temple. "My mother had a run-in with Fleur before. Bill got caught in the middle, and it wasn't pleasant." Bill felt like he'd been dragged to the brink. Fleur hadn't spoken to him in days, and it stung. As Percy spoke, he glanced over to see Cedric spinning around with Cho Chang, wrapped up in each other. Among the Constellation Society, Cedric was the most successful at the moment. Malfoy climbed down from a tree and immediately started looking for someone to needle. "Ha-ha, now you're the last place," he taunted Heinrich smugly. "The weakest." But that underachiever had crawled back to the top. Malfoy's smirk wavered when Heinrich met his gaze, and suddenly Malfoy began to fidget and shuffle his feet in an awkward, jerky dance. Everyone watched silently as he kept hopping from one foot to the other, like a kid who'd been caught mid-panic. 2 years ago, Heinrich could barely hold his own in exchange with Voldemort and Ardolfo. Now he'd come this far. Malfoy could barely contain himself, on the verge of tears, and yet still proud to be the worst. Astoria tried to comfort him, but his self-pity only deepened. In the end, Malfoy's burden was lifted when Lucius finally came forward to clear things up. After a year living in fear, Lucius was the happiest person when they heard the news of Lord Voldemort's death. The only shadow left was Narcissa's hospitalization at Silver Cross. She'd been subjected to too many memory charms, though nothing irreversible. Bellatrix, in the end, had not gone so far as to use the worst curses on her sister. Cynically, Narcissa became the only Malfoy with medical insurance. Dumbledore stood in a pure white space, and at first blinked, stunned. Then, slowly, recognition came over him. This was the borderland where life brushed against death, the place where memories that refused to die lingered. He felt a strange relief. After wandering so long, he had returned to the beginning. Godric's Hollow, the town of his youth. 2 months that shaped him, his sister's death, the night Harry's parents died. He let out a small, weary breath. "Perhaps I can sit a while," he thought. He sat on a long bench, like an old traveler who'd finally come back home. He let his eyes drift over the familiar landmarks, the post office, the pub, the little church, the stream that always smelled faintly of damp grass. It was here, in these corners, that he had met them. Them. A face, a scene snapped into his mind. Bathilda Bagshot's house. Two figures by a wooden doorway. One was Gellert Grindelwald, Bathilda's grandnephew. The other was, he felt as if a memory charm had struck him. He could not make out the second person, but Dumbledore had learned long ago that memories had their own ways of surfacing. Even if his conscious mind could not recall, his subconscious would drag it up. He walked toward Bathilda's house. The world around him was pieced together from the deepest fragments of his memory, so the missing pieces might still appear here. Inside, the room was bright with that peculiar white light. An arched dresser held a cluster of framed photographs. In the finest frames, 7 or 8 of them, were faces from summers long past. Dumbledore picked one up. A blond boy looked back at him, carefree and lazy-eyed, smiling as if the summer would never end. In the next frame stood that same blond boy beside another, a red-headed young man with bright blue eyes, Dumbledore himself, younger by decades, laughing alongside him. Each photo showed either the blonde or the young Dumbledore. The last, most prominent frame drew him in. It showed the blonde and the redhead side by side, but something else hovered at the edge. A smudge of pure white, as if someone had tried not to be seen. The blonde shifted his shoulder, as if to reveal the figure hiding behind him. Dumbledore leaned closer. The image, fragile as breath, began to slip. The frame in his hands started to blur and fade. Panic rose in him. Everything around him followed, images and walls dissolving into nothing. He reached out to touch the frame as if that could hold the memory in place, but the world collapsed into a brilliant white. When the light cleared, he was in a room with purple curtains. Madame Pomfrey's relieved voice floated over him. "You're awake, Albus." Pomfrey, who had been clenching her heart with worry, visibly relaxed and allowed herself a rare, exasperated smile. "I thought Potter's potion hadn't worked," she muttered. Dumbledore lifted his right hand to his throbbing brow and pushed himself upright. The blackened stains that had marked his hand were fading. The last 2 fingers still bore the dark residue. He stared at them, feeling a tangle of feelings he didn't entirely want to name. He understood, in a way he would rather not, what Harry had tried to do. Pomfrey chattered on. "You slept too long, Albus. They ended this term early." "I slept well," Dumbledore said, stretching, trying for a lighter tone. "It makes an old man feel younger." Pomfrey, distracted by the news, bustled off to tell others. When the door shut, Dumbledore's expression grew distant. The third person in that frame lingered in his mind, a hole he could not fill. He sighed softly. "Memories fade with time," he whispered to himself. "Whether events truly happened or not matters less and less." The aftermath of the Hogwarts War was far from over. John sat inside the Johnny Silverhand shop, a newspaper headline making his jaw tighten. "Johnny Silverhand, a butcher." He folded the paper closed and looked up at Heinrich, who was still being pestered by Kin. John considered whether to tell Kin to pipe down for a bit. "What should we do?" he asked. Tangmi hesitated, voice small. "Are you really?" "Indeed," John said, nodding, not denying it. "It's not exactly a big secret." Even with John's admission, Tangmi found it hard to accept. His boss had actually gone to Neon and wiped out a magic institute. The International Wizarding Press labeled Silverhand Johnny a butcher. The Silverhand product line was facing international boycotts, with more than 100,000 people demanding Silverhand Johnny's arrest. The reports of atrocities stood in stark contrast to the other headlines celebrating the man who killed Lord Voldemort, the true savior, John Wick. On one side, endless curses. On the other, endless praise. 2 extremes, and yet the same person. "The Ministry of Magic is going to award me a Merlin First-Class Medal. They want to commend my contributions," John said. "And the International Confederation of Wizards will list Silverhand Johnny among the world's top 10 dark wizards," Tangmi added bitterly. John chuckled. "People are very interesting, aren't they?" Tangmi forced a smile. "What's interesting about this? Being named among the world's top 10 dark wizards, alongside Grindelwald and Voldemort, makes sense, I guess. Kill a Dark Lord and you're called a Dark Lord yourself? The Dragon Slayer becoming the dragon?" "Is it really wise not to respond?" Tangmi sighed. "And the Werewolf Equalization Initiative, there's pushback. The purebloods are dead set against us." John casually tossed the paper aside. Before absolute power, all resistance is meaningless, he said. I'm waiting for the right moment, an opportunity to crush them completely. Tang Mi blinked. An opportunity? John placed his finger on the headline. This opportunity. He tapped the paper where it read, John Wick, Slayer of the Dark Lord, to be awarded medal at 8 p.m. Standing, he walked to the wardrobe. I should pick something handsome to wear, he said with an inexplicable smile. After all, there's quite a show coming. Tang Mi found John increasingly unfathomable, but the certainty in John's manner made one thing clear. He was utterly confident. At 8 o'clock, the Ministry of Magic was swarmed with reporters. They had last followed John's name in connection with the blood magic potion and his Merlin second-class medal. Back then, they'd thought he was a rising talent. A year later, that rising star had become a blazing comet. John had left Hogwarts and become the most sensational figure in the wizarding world. He and Neville Longbottom had killed Lord Voldemort. While others were still students, he had become a legend. Chocolate frog cards would tell his story. One man was a hero, another reviled. Silverhand, Johnny's notoriety only fed the speculation about a possible third Dark Lord. When John arrived, he was instantly bathed in camera flashes. He remained composed as Old Barty personally presented the Merlin first-class medal. It wasn't an academic award, so there was no Wizengamot debate. John saw the Longbottoms, Mr. and Mrs. Longbottom, beaming with pride. Neville, anxious, stood near him wearing the most elastic clothes Mrs. Longbottom had made. Old Barty pinned the medal on John's chest and leaned close to speak only to him. What will you do about the Magic Institute matter? Barty asked. I'll handle it, John replied quietly. Barty appeared half convinced. After all, a Magic Institute was an institution on the same level as Hogwarts and Durmstrang. They shook hands as the cameras kept flashing. Neville then stepped forward awkwardly to receive his medal. The wizarding world, buzzing with hope, wondered whether Neville might be the true savior. After the ceremony came interviews. Neville preferred to avoid them. John answered with steady composure. Then a question landed from a reporter in a newsboy cap. Some say Silverhand Johnny will become the third Dark Lord. What do you think? All eyes turned to John, hungry for a statement, a declaration of war against a rising darkness, or an inspirational, I'm here. John chuckled, met the reporter's gaze, and said calmly, I'm Silverhand Johnny. The room froze. Silverhand Johnny? John Wick? The stunned silence felt absurd. The hero who had slain the Dark Lord and was now being named among Merlin medal recipients was claiming to be the man accused of massacring a magic institute. Some dismissed it as a joke fit for the quibbler, but the international reaction would be explosive. What Silverhand Johnny had been accused of was worse than anything Voldemort had done. Voldemort attacked schools, yes, but Silverhand Johnny had allegedly destroyed one, triggering consequences that nearly exposed the magical world. Neon had protested. Some threatened attacks on Silverhand retail stores. At home, the pureblood factions sharpened their knives, calling for the government to strip John of his honors. They painted him as a Dark Lord in the making. Old Barty's face went pale. He had not expected John's solution to be a public confession. He had imagined, perhaps hoped, that one day John would present himself as Silverhand Johnny for positive reasons, as a benefactor, a savior. Certainly not someone who would admit immediately after wiping out a magic institute. The newsboy cap reporter, who had come hoping to emulate a career break like Rita Skeeter's, was stunned beyond speech. He had been building the headline in his head. Dragon Slayer becomes dragon. Hero becomes Dark Lord. The thought of such a scoop made his eyes shine. He recovered quickly and jabbed another question. Are you saying you're the butcher who destroyed the Magic Institute? The one who nearly exposed Neon's magical community? John smiled faintly. So that's how you're viewing this. Isn't it true? The reporter pressed. You destroyed a school and killed its headmaster and several staff. John gave him a half smile. You're from the Daily Prophet, he said. So you think you can convict me and pass judgment? I'm a reporter. It's my job to reveal the truth. The man sounded self-righteous, forgetting, if he ever knew, that John was a force that could crush him. His bravado was fantasy. John regarded him coolly. Do you actually know the truth? Of course I do, the reporter said without hesitation. Do you know what the Magic Institute did? What did the Magic Institute do? the reporter repeated, confused. It's a school. It teaches wizards. John's smile widened. He snapped his fingers. A group of people burst into the room, pushing past the guards. Let me through. I said let me through, someone shouted. The leader of the group, heavily disguised, nearly rushed John to embrace him. Boss, I knew you weren't dead. It was Gauci, unmistakable in his excitement, behaving like someone who'd found his safest bet still intact. Behind him came Musashi and Shizuka, other instructors, and a number of children. The reporters were bewildered. Seeing these faces, Asian faces, stirred something in their minds, a subtle, uncomfortable shift. The Newsboy Cap reporter felt a vague, disquieting unease creep into his excitement. 488, Chapter 488. John shoved Gauci's head aside, looked at the reporter, and said coldly, Do you still think the Magic Institute is a good school? He sneered. Then do you know that since Yuan Zhang became principal, this school has been running inhumane experiments? With a flick of his fingers, rolls of documents spilled from John's small bag. A duplication charm sent copies into everyone's hands. Old Barty took one and began to read. He knew more than 200 languages. Neon's language was nothing to him. As he scanned the pages, his face grew pale and tight with anger. Veins stood out on his forehead. Human experiments, he ground out. The Magic Institute. Human experiments? John had expected confusion, so he had prepared an English version. He also had photographs. He'd taken them before he blew up the institute with Gauci's help. Words paled next to images. The reporters who had been shouting that Johnny Silverhand was a butcher fell silent. Eyes widened as the pictures spread. Children with expressions of pain, corpses preserved in jars of liquid, the Muggle children who had been abducted. The torture ranged from physical to psychological to soul deep. These victims were no longer human in any meaningful sense. The children who had come with their mentors shrank behind the adults. Their hair was thin, bodies scarred from years of abuse and testing. Some reduced to emaciation. Some had hands frozen into necrosis and then hammered off. The photos were backed up by testimony from people who had worked at the institute but refused to participate. They spoke of young wizards who vanished inside the school and later reappeared with all their memories wiped by powerful memory charms, some so damaged they never attended school again. All of it happened under Yuan Zhang's control and the pressure of powerful backers, and every attempt to stop it had been buried. You didn't blow up a school, John said, sweeping his gaze over the reporters. You blew up a den of evil that tortured children. The Dark Lord you accused? He was the savior of those boys and girls. Now, he asked quietly, do you still think I'm a butcher? Physical evidence, victims' testimony, photographs, the case was complete. The explosion was about to shake the magical world. John had gone to Neon and brought back a bomb whose impact on the magical community would be felt like a nuclear blast. A magic school was involved, and the scandal touched off not only important figures in Neon, but implicated connections to the Muggle world. Some of the instruments in the photos had a distinctly Muggle flavor, machines that hinted at Muggle studies. It was all explosive. By morning, the International Confederation of Wizards was in uproar. Neon, once seen as a victim, suddenly looked like the perpetrator. Neon's initial attempt to respond only made things worse. Their statement turned Neon into a target of global criticism. The Japanese Ministry of Magic declared the evidence baseless and tried to silence the story, but silencing wasn't possible anymore. The people implicated weren't only Neon citizens, there were victims from other countries. John told everyone he had found a list at the experimental site. When he released it, the fallout was severe. The list didn't just name Neon officials, it implicated the current Japanese Minister of Magic, a former minister, high-level Neon Muggle government officials, and members of so-called royal families. Neon purebloods appeared on it too. In short, it would paralyze half of Neon's magical establishment. The Japanese ministry tried every way to block the news and reclose ranks, but modern technology made that impossible. Neon's magical society erupted. The minister was forced to step down, and the ritual apologies and bows lost their power. Old Barty led the International Confederation in pressing Neon relentlessly. Human experimentation crossed the absolute line, and on such a scale that the world could not ignore it. John announced that the Silver Hand Foundation would take responsibility for the victimized young wizards and set up an organization to serve them. Muggle victims would be assisted in returning to Muggle society. The move elevated John's reputation from villain to benefactor overnight. The pureblood elites who had attacked him fell silent, one by one, as a series of revelations and actions made their earlier criticisms look like protecting monsters. Old Barty murmured that John had been born at the right time. If it had been just a few years later, there would have been no suspense if this monster had run for minister. But John did not let the praise go to his head. He discovered something else, something darker. He seemed, in some way, to have been tricked by death. 509. Exile. The price of playing with death. John rubbed his eyes and stared at the black and white photograph on the table. He sighed. Color blind now? The world had lost its color. He only realized it after waking that morning. He'd told himself it was just fatigue, but now he thought it was the price he'd paid for using magic. My right eye was blurry before, he murmured. At least it isn't completely blind. Basil swooped in, cocking his head. Riddle arrived beside him, cooing. John took out dried fish and set them in front of the two owls. Kiki, the big-headed gray owl, flew in after them and was promptly shooed away by Basil. Clearly, Kiki, brash and self-important, wasn't cut out to eat with the two veterans. John climbed down from the attic. Watson sat on the couch, frowning at an envelope. It had been a week since they left Hogwarts, and Watson still felt attached to the old routines. I arranged 20 heavily armed men with Chicago typewriters at the school gates, plus 3 Gatling guns and a tank, Watson said, smacking his lips with a hint of regret. We even had an armed helicopter, borrowed from your grandfather in Russia, but there was never a chance to use it. John watched his father in silence. Given the current state of affairs in Russia and his grandfather's influence there, an armed helicopter wasn't impossible. He'd just never expected his father to have arranged all of it so casually. Leaving aside how the helicopter got in, John asked, where did you find a tank? There's an American immigrant, Yuri Olov. Some call him the Lord of War. There's nothing he can't get, Watson said with a shrug. I've done some business with him. Aren't you going to open a hotel? John asked, surprised. Hotels don't usually need tanks. Watson smiled. Every hotel needs security measures. He sat back on the sofa, shaking his head in wonder. Magic is truly something. I thought our house had been blown to bits, and yet it's fine. The Wick House had been bombed once. Watson had expected them to be on the streets. But John had waved a wand and fixed everything. Publicly, they'd credited a reliable construction company, vouchsafed by John's skill, and believe it or not, the Dursleys had accepted the explanation. They even went out for a celebration meal, grateful they wouldn't have to spend the holiday in fear with Harry any longer. The protective magic that had once required Harry to remain under the Dursleys' roof until he came of age no longer needed renewing with Voldemort gone. Petunia felt conflicted, but Vernon was simply relieved. He'd even brought over a roasted turkey. John had always thought turkeys were eaten because chickens were cheap. That morning, he suspected Vernon valued nothing so cheaply. They sat for breakfast. 2 jam jars stood side by side on the table, identical, labels torn off by some inattentive middle-aged hand. One blue, one red, blueberry and strawberry. The middle-aged man, Watson, reached for the strawberry jar. John hesitated, then handed the jar on his left to his father. Watson didn't notice the swap. He focused on the letter in his hand while spreading jam on his bread. A few seconds later, he frowned and looked at the jar in his palm with suspicion. Then he glanced up at John, whose expression remained unreadable. Watson's eyes narrowed. Was it deliberate? Did you do it on purpose, he asked cautiously, or was it an accident? Accident, John said without changing his face. Watson stared at the blueberry jam he held. An accident? Chapter 489. Why do you look so self-righteous? Watson said, but he didn't linger on it. Are you going to your, magic company today? Over the past week, Watson, as a father, had found it hard to swallow. He'd worked so hard to start his own business, only to discover his son had already founded a company years earlier. All that effort, and for what? Watson felt deflated. John nodded. He still had to go to Silver Hand Manor. Madam Wick was brewing a new jasmine tea Daphne had sent from the magical world. Tasting tea from that realm, it didn't seem all that different from Muggle fare. John finished his bread and used the Flu network in the basement to get to Silverhand Manor. Heinrich lived there now. John wanted to check on him. Heinrich had been the first person in the magical world to truly die and then be resurrected for so many years. It wasn't unreasonable that John, a level 7 alchemist, should examine him personally. Perhaps because the elixir of life had been used as a core component in reconstructing him, Heinrich's body radiated vigor. John watched as Heinrich sliced his palm. Without magical healing, the cut knit itself into a red scar remarkably fast. Amazing, John said. He reflected that he had created 1.5 lives in total. The first was the crumple-horned snorkack, a wholly new creature born from a surge of magical power. The half was Heinrich, reconstituted with the Holy Grail to receive his soul back. Each, in its way, was unique. After the examination, John glanced toward the door and rubbed his forehead. You need to find a way to make Jin less clingy. Heinrich's expression darkened as he peered out. Jin, who now resembled a large golden retriever, was peeking around the corner. Since Heinrich's resurrection, the boy had feared he might disappear again. John said, I'll give you both a vacation. Consider it a change of scenery. No need, Heinrich replied flatly. Yes, you do, John insisted. Edgar's man who caught the light needed rest. Company paid travel. I need you to go to America, then France. I'm opening another branch and I need you to coordinate details with Nagini. It wasn't exactly a vacation, so Heinrich didn't press the refusal. Once they left, John sank back into his chair, looking worn. He rubbed his eyes. This time it wasn't merely color blindness. His vision had been growing steadily blurrier. At this rate, he might go blind. I need to get it checked, he thought, and decided to give himself a thorough examination. He stood, his head spinning, and steadied himself on the table. Something was terribly wrong, extremely wrong. John looked at his hand and found a circular mark, the Gate of Things. What on earth was that? He stared at it. Surprised? A voice whispered. He looked up. Death was there, not physically, but as a reflection at the edge of his sight. Its voice was distorted and hoarse. Playing with death never ends well, especially when you break the ironclad rules of the magical world. Death sounded almost gleeful. Even death, who governs life and death, has no right to resurrect people. It pointed. John felt a touch on his chest, though no hand was there. You have angered this world. You must pay the price. John stared at his left hand as golden sand began to flow from his arm. From his right hand, silvery life energy and a dark soul-eating curse were draining away. Black and purple currents welled in his eyes. We may meet again, or we may not, Death intoned. Farewell, one who toys with death, one who challenges the rules. John felt himself being pulled, ripped away. Above him, he saw the sky torn with collision marks, like two worlds clashing. A wolf howl filled his ears, and he glimpsed a white wolf, a herald of catastrophe, bearing down on him. The next instant, he was somewhere that felt like the space before passing through the Gate of Things. A place where worlds met and their rules fragmented. A true conjunction of the spheres. He hadn't expected to be exiled, and certainly not by magic. It seemed the laws of magic had reacted to his transgressions. He could wait to be cast into another world, or he could act. John never sat idly by. His pupils narrowed to vertical slits, and he lifted his right hand. An unfinished contract still marked his palm. The Gate of Things lines traced themselves and intersected with the desperate outline of a witch from another realm. He didn't want to be sent to that world, only to use the power there as bargaining. Equivalent exchange, he murmured. A chaotic light flickered in his eyes. Golden flames flared in his right hand, and a key materialized in his palm. A moment before exile completed, he used the key to open a small pocket of space. Inside floated a giant stone tablet. Clutching the locket at his chest, John dove into the tablet. The exile's power smashed the stone and sent it shattering into nothing. When John regained his senses, he was in endless blackness. He didn't know where, but he was still in his own universe. Footsteps approached, and a woman's voice asked, "Where did this young wizard come from?" Chapter 510, 1899, Godric's Hollow. Bathilda Bagshot was a writer whose love of books outshone everything else, even romantic pursuits. She cataloged what she knew and discovered in notebooks, That obsession made her the perfect author for a history of magic. She had not been a dazzling beauty in her youth. The hours she spent in the Hogwarts library had cost her looks and earned her the reputation of a bookworm. She had always been a little slow to notice the world's smaller dramas, but she had long since accepted that. Decades after graduating, Bathilda lived quietly in her house. This morning, on a whim, she stepped outside. She walked past her neighbor's yard, where morning glories climbed over a closed courtyard. She felt a pang of pity. The household had suffered. Some time ago, a child had lost control and caused the death of a beautiful woman. Bathilda had once brought a cake to the door in an attempt at friendship. The offer had been refused. Later, the eldest son wrote a review that mentioned her work, and contact between them increased. She pitied the children left in the wake of tragedy, a father who had fled and a mother who had died, leaving 3 children, the youngest girl sickly and pale. Following a small stream, Bathilda wandered into a quiet, seldom visited forest, a place where her mind, tired from reading, could rest. Today, though, she was not alone. Sitting among the ferns was a slender, fragile-looking boy with snow-white hair and vacant eyes. He looked pitiful, so fragile that even Bathilda, who typically overlooked such things, felt a sudden urge to enfold him in her arms. She stepped closer and gently tried to strike up a conversation. Chapter 490. Where did this little wizard come from? It was a terrible pickup line. Her flirtatious nephew could have done better. Bathilda Bagshot attributed it to instinct. This young man simply didn't feel like a muggle. When he turned his head, an invisible pressure flared for a heartbeat. Only the old spinster, a little slow of perception, failed to notice. The young man fumbled to his feet, fingers grazing thorny vines as he rose. His helpless, awkward air tugged at Bathilda's solitary heart. "If I may ask, where is this?" he said politely, the pressure fading as he spoke. "This is the forest at Godric's Hollow," Bathilda replied. "Where are your family?" They were in Bathilda's house. The attic smelled of damp wood and dust. A leak near the stairs had never been properly fixed. John felt a small relief that, though his arrival had been off, he was still within his native country. The woman who'd found him was a wizard, though a very reclusive one. She'd never heard of John Wick. Bathilda took him for some poor little wizard, and he let her. His eyes were a problem. John suspected it had something to do with soul afflictions and curses. A soul potion might restore him, or at least stop the world from turning to black. He picked up a biscuit from the table. He thought it had chocolate, and ate it, barely discerning the taste. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said with a soft chuckle. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "I don't think you can." Bathilda shook her head. She'd brought him in out of pity. She didn't expect any help from a child who looked like a schoolboy. "Are you a Hogwarts student? It doesn't look like the holidays have started." John frowned at her confusion about the calendar. "No, holidays have already started," he said. "My neighbor has a 5th year from Hogwarts," Bathilda said doubtfully. "He hasn't come home yet." "Maybe something delayed him," John offered. "I've been on holiday for a week. Wait." A thought struck him, and his expression tightened. "What is the date today?" "May 3rd. I couldn't be mistaken," she answered. John murmured, distracted. Time, not place, was wrong. Hogwarts didn't finish until mid-June. Time had flowed backward, by more than a month, perhaps much more. He swallowed and asked the question that mattered. "What year is it?" Bathilda blinked at his odd question. 99, she said slowly. For a moment he thought she meant 1999. Then she added, 1899. You seem muddled. 100 years in the past. John stood silent. Bathilda scolded him for all the questions, and he offered one more. "Do you have a time turner?" Bathilda, a writer by trade, had no ties to the unspeakables. There was no time turner. John had nowhere else to go. He claimed to be a 6th year still enrolled at Hogwarts. Bathilda interpreted it as youthful stubbornness and took him in. He learned the name of his rescuer, Bathilda Bagshot, and the name struck an odd familiarity that his current state of mind couldn't fully place. He thought of his exile from the magical world, of being ostracized, and the strange luck that had landed him not back among his enemies, but a century earlier. At least Lord Voldemort had not been born yet. His magic was still with him, though his sight was not. Maybe he could look up an old teacher. Nicholas Flamel was alive somewhere in this time, but the rules of time magic warned him hard and clear. Do not interact with your past self. Do not change anything in the past. Others had broken these rules and paid terrible prices. Families' entire histories had been rewritten. John forced himself to be cautious. Anything he did here might cascade into the future he knew, or erase him entirely. Before I do anything, I need to be careful, he told himself. He sat in Bathilda's attic, turning possibilities over until the drip of a leaking roof pulled his attention. He rose and followed the sound to the stairs. Tapping the banister, he let his super sense spell run. He traced the source of the dripping and reached out. Reparo, he said, confident. A white flash sprang from his palm, and then there was a tremendous crack. Boom! Bathilda hurried down, astonished. The skylight above was open and smashed. John stared, stunned at the results. He'd meant to cast a simple repairing charm. Instead, something in his wandless casting had misfired. He let his fingers unclench and gave Bathilda a sheepish smile. Bathilda looked from the shattered skylight to John's abashed face. She could repair the leak herself. She was a wizard after all. If she hadn't been so lazy about it before, the roof might never have leaked. Still, the mishap forced her hand to lecture the boy. Wandless magic was dangerous, something only the most practiced wizards could manage reliably. All right, I've become a bad student, John sighed inwardly. He, the king of Slytherin, top of his class, someone even Hermione couldn't outdo, was being treated like a reckless schoolboy. If this got back to Malfoy, the laughter would never stop. Even if no one else scolded him, John resolved not to use magic again until he had a proper wand. He was afraid another misstep would blow apart the whole house. There was worse news from his dislocation. The silver-veined sword, bound to him by a contractual enchantment that let him summon it by grasping at empty air, would no longer appear. Whether ruined by the trauma of his banishment or by the unfamiliar rules of this era, the sword failed to respond. John waved his hand in the empty air, feeling the absence like a missing limb. The silver-veined sword could not be summoned. Chapter 491. John truly had nothing left. He didn't even have a wand. After staying at Bathilda's for a few days, he resolved to make one as soon as possible. Buying a wand wasn't an option. Ollivander remembered, with uncanny precision, who had picked up which wand and what their names were. John didn't want to risk changing history, and there was no place in this world like Silverhand Johnny to fall back on. He would have to do it himself. Godric's Hollow had resources in abundance. When he first arrived in the woods, he had smelled linden trees, suitable wand wood. The magical world could not be judged by Muggle common sense. For example, when John, who was blind, announced he was going out, Bathilda didn't try to stop him. She simply didn't think a blind person would encounter particular trouble. Wizards thought differently, and John had long ago learned to accept that. He retraced the path he'd taken when he first came, counting steps back from Bathilda's doorstep until he found the path into the woods. He set off and promptly walked into a wall. Hiss, something's not right. He touched his nose and reached out, feeling a courtyard wall where none should have been. Had he miscounted? A breeze carried the scent of morning glories. He remembered Bathilda mentioning a neighbor who grew them. He must have bumped into the neighbor's house. He moved along the wall, feeling his way. On the second floor, at a window that was usually kept shut, a girl watched him. Even though John was blind, his other senses were sharp. He noticed someone watching and looked up. Startled like a fawn, the girl ducked back behind the curtains. The gaze vanished, and John took it for nothing more than curiosity. Once he had passed, the girl peered out again. All John left was a silhouette, but it was enough to stir the girl's curiosity about those vacant eyes she had seen. Ariana. Her brother's voice made the girl quickly close the window. A red-haired boy, about 17 or 18, came into view. The striking thing about him was his blue eyes, old beyond his years. His mother had died, and the responsibility of caring for his younger siblings had fallen on him just after he graduated from Hogwarts. His younger brother was stubborn and had not returned yet. His sister was ill and unable to attend Hogwarts. A planned trip to Europe with friends had been canceled because of it all. The bird that should have flown had broken its own wings to stay and care for family. Ariana hugged her teddy bear silently. Her brother, not pushing her to speak, smiled gently and reminded her to eat. He knew her limits and did not force her. John finally reached the woods. The stream nearly sent him tumbling. He almost slipped on a stone, but the breeze carried the scent of grass, lifting his hair. The rustle of the leaves soothed him. He fumbled through until his fingers found linden bark. Alchemy made him sensitive to scents. He picked up a fallen linden branch and stowed it away. "It's really inconvenient without my satchel," he muttered. Without it, he had to carry things awkwardly. He still wanted oak if he could find it. Oak sap would improve the wand's quality, but he did not venture too deep. He wasn't yet familiar with the area. He searched the outskirts for any sign of oak and, finding none, returned. As a blind man in a small village, he stood out. An old resident noticed and offered help, which John politely declined. The white-haired blind stranger attracted attention wherever he went, especially at Bathilda Bagshot's house, an old maid who had never married. People whispered, but no one did him harm. John continued to go out the next day and the next, becoming gradually familiar with the village. From her window, Ariana watched him again, holding her bear. The blind man had a presence that drew her attention, even though she usually disliked talking to others. This time, he didn't walk into a wall. In fact, he grew more adept as days passed. He moved as if his eyes weren't blind. Only occasionally did he need to reach out for a wall. Ariana's interest in him caught her brother's eye, and he wondered when someone had come to live next door to Bathilda. Back at Bathilda's, John found a bottle of oak sap among her things. She used it to repair scattered book pages, and she had no objection to him borrowing it. She was, however, surprised that a blind man could plan to make his own wand. John cleaned the linden bark and borrowed tools to shape the wood. For a core, he plucked one of his own hairs. Though human, he had attributes akin to magical beings, and a hair core would make the wand more comfortable for him to wield. Like Fleur choosing her Vila grandmother's hair, it promised better affinity for spellcasting. Wand making wasn't finished in a day. John kept busy. He went out almost every day and used his alchemical knowledge to gather materials for potions. Bathilda never questioned his frequent outings, so oblivious that John thought her choice to remain unmarried might have been sensible. He learned small things about her: the playboy nephew who must have been charming in youth, the quiet household otherwise. The lack of strangers and drama made John feel safer. As an outsider, he wanted to stay under the radar until he found a way back. Above all, he decided to avoid contact with anyone likely to become famous later. That was the best way to avoid changing history. If, heaven forbid, something happened that revived Lord Voldemort, he couldn't bear the thought of death calling him back again. A week passed. John moved through the woods with ease now. The villagers had grown used to him. At last, the wand that had been soaking in oak sap could be taken out. It was sticky at first, but once it dried and he finished the last details, it was complete. He tested it on the simplest things first. A broken cup from the day before regnit under his charms. Orchideus, he tried, and a spray of orchids blossomed at the tip of the wand, not the white flash of a shattering spell. 13 3/4 inches linden, human hair core, he noted aloud. He had made it deliberately long so it could double as something else, if needed. With a wand, he no longer had to fear casting spells. He set up a super sense spell to maintain his vision. A gentle tap on the table, and the spell radiated outward. Bathilda's house assembled itself in his mind like a room in a memory. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. A boy about John's age stood in the doorway, golden hair and a wild, handsome face. Bathilda froze for a beat, dazed. For a moment, she seemed to see her nephew in his youth. The boy called Bathilda great-aunt. Bathilda looked surprised to see her great-nephew, but she had already guessed why he'd come. He seemed to have been expelled from school, too. She thought of the other expelled boy in the house and sighed inwardly. What is wrong with children these days? All rebellious at that age. Bathilda introduced the two boys of similar age. "This is Yoel," she said. John chuckled softly. He knew better than to leave his real name lying around history, so he made one up. But as the name left his mouth, it felt oddly familiar. The other boy smiled pleasantly. "I'm Gale." Gale's eyes held a cautious edge. He had come to Godric's Hollow for a reason and had not expected to find another wizard in his great-aunt's lonely house. He instinctively hid his true name. John sensed the distrust behind Gale's forced calm. His own alias had been as casually chosen. Both boys were expelled, both of them carrying secrets. John's room was in the attic, much like the little room he'd had at Wick. Gale's was on the second floor. John fiddled with his wand, doing the last of some tinkering. Gale watched him quietly. Expelled from Durmstrang for experiments the school judged extreme, Gale had traveled alone across half of Europe to Godric's Hollow. The journey had made him prematurely worldly. He distrusted strangers and had learned to read people quickly. He knew Bathilda well enough to be wary of coincidences. John's arrival at this precise moment made him suspicious, and he decided to test the boy. "Are you making a wand?" Gale asked. Although John couldn't see him, he had an uncanny sensitivity to other people's attention. He had already noticed Gale. "As you can see, yes." "A wand maker is a rare trade," Gale said, coming up into the attic. "If you have that skill, why are you in Godric's Hollow?" Gale's eyes probed. He had gleaned a few scraps of information from Bathilda. John was a Hogwarts student who had apparently been expelled. Gale already knew the reason for his own expulsion. What had John done? "It was an accident," John shrugged, brushing grinding dust off the table. "I didn't mean to end up here. I've also got some problems with my eyes." "I'm grateful to Great-Aunt Bathilda," Gale said. "You can rest assured." John laughed. "No need to be so suspicious." Gale was more mature than most boys his age. John, however, was Johnny Silverhand, architect of the vast Silverhand commercial empire and lord of Silverhand Manor. He stood on a different level, and Gale's probing felt transparent. Gale did not seem embarrassed. He smiled and changed the subject. "Great-Aunt hopes we'll get along." He extended a hand. "I think we can let our guard down." Both were shrewd. Gale understood John was not like the ordinary students who'd been at Durmstrang. As long as sharing a roof didn't interfere with his own plans, Gale was willing to accept a truce. A measured friendliness could bring advantages, a principle he'd learned early. "Hello, Yol," John said. "Hello, Gale." Their hands met. The blond boy was tall for his age, lanky like one of the Weasley twins, with an easy, untamed air, a golden eagle with unclipped wings. 3 days passed. During that time, Gale's curiosity about John deepened into keen interest. He treated John as an equal in intellect and was frequently in the attic, sometimes merely observing him work. Godric's Hollow had resources in plenty, which was why so many wizards settled there. John busied himself processing herbs. Gale watched from the doorway. "Do you study potions as well?" he asked. "It's a basic skill for a wizard," John replied. He'd borrowed a cauldron from Bathilda, and a golden flame licked steadily beneath it. Gale watched with fascination. The more he watched, the more he found this pier full of surprises. "What's that?" "An everlasting flame," John said, waving his wand and coaxing a small steady fire to appear at the tip. "A fire that never goes out." "Interesting." Gale's curiosity sharpened. "That looks advanced. It's not something a student would usually have access to." "Knowledge doesn't have to come only from school," John said, tapping his temple. "As Ravenclaw once said, extraordinary wisdom is humanity's greatest treasure." Gale listened, impressed. In 3 days, he had begun to believe this stranger possessed knowledge beyond that of many Durmstrang professors. He'd thought his travels across Europe had taught him enough, yet John's experiences seemed deeper. The feeling of wanting to share his plan, the grand plan he carried to change the wizarding world, grew stronger. It was a basic human instinct, to attach oneself to someone stronger. Bathilda was pleased to see the boys getting along. She thought of a neighboring boy she worried about, lonely and burdened with a sick sister and a hot-headed younger brother. People of the same age needed peers. Bathilda decided she would introduce that boy to the two in her home. After Gale left the attic that afternoon, John tapped the table and cast a super sense charm, letting his awareness spread through the room. He exhaled. Finally, he's gone. Gale had been a walking encyclopedia of questions. John had answered lightly just to get rid of him. He didn't want too much contact with others, not if it might change the future. But 7 out of 10 of Gale's sentences had been probes, not just ordinary curiosity, but deliberate attempts at exposure. John suspected the other boy's vigilance had roots deeper than mere travel-hardened caution. Gale's probing wasn't only external, he had pressed on the mental level as well. Legilimency at his age, John murmured. And occlumency, too. Gale had tried to read his mind. John's occlumency had masqueraded as an effortless shield. Gale kept operating at the edge of his skill, as if there were secrets inside John's head he was desperate to see. John had little interest in those secrets. By his era, a century in the future, any of them would be history. There was a book on the table, evidently left behind on purpose. John picked it up and ran his fingers over the embossed, gold-stamped cover. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, John asked, puzzled. Was that on purpose or an accident? Most witches and wizards knew the tales. Beetle's book was the sort of collection that lived in 1,000 magical homes, but John knew some things in it were true. The story of the three brothers, the Deathly Hallows. He touched his chest. He had lost his sword. All he had brought was a fake locket with the resurrection stone tucked inside. It ought to be a coincidence. He didn't think whoever'd left the book had found his resurrection stone and was trying to hint at him. He tossed the book aside. Who gives a book to a blind man and expects him to read it? He wondered what the other person had been playing at. The next day, Bathilda summoned him. Gale went with him. John handed the tales to Gale. Your book. Thanks. I figured it was with you, Gale said with a smile. John was slightly at a loss. I really like those stories, Gale added, especially the story of the three brothers. Oh, why aren't you in better spirits? Because I'm blind. What do you expect? John replied. Gale's chatter stopped. For the first time, he was quiet. Hello, Alan knocked at the door. Bathilda, suddenly alert, hurried to open it. A red-haired boy stood on the threshold. He was older than John and Gale, but shorter than both. John had always been taller than his peers. Though thin, Gale was tall, even taller than John. The red-haired boy looked the smallest by comparison. Bathilda brightened. Oh, you're here. She ushered him in. The boy immediately noticed the two standing behind the doorframe, one with golden hair, one with white, and the odd, unmistakable air around them. He stared. Gale, amused by the boy's stare, greeted him in halting German-accented English. Hello, my name is Ga. Glancing at John as if remembering something, Gale adjusted his pronunciation. John shrugged and said, Hello, my name is Yoel. Gale? Yoel? The name sounded like part of some private joke. The red-haired boy looked bemused, then offered, Then you can call me Al. Not slow after all. He'd realized this was a little game. Al? Gale was delighted, blinking and offering his hand. What a lovely name. Likewise, Al said. Bathilda liked seeing the young people warm to one another. Whether as great-aunt or neighbor, she didn't want the children to be as lonely as she had been. Al, in particular, carried the weight of caring for his family. He had lost some of his spark. Fresh friendships might help. This was their first meeting. All three were bright, each impressive in different ways. Al was head boy at Hogwarts, top of his year. His quick mind and talent caught Gale's attention. Gale and Al quickly found in each other an equal. To them, John felt more like a professor than a peer. In the following days, the two of them, Gale and Al, became close friends. John, meanwhile, returned to his potions work. He dripped the black liquid into his eyes and felt a sour, burning ache. The good news, there was a hint of light behind the dark. Next, he thought, came the flaw in his soul. Dense magic power clouded his sight, and the most honest cure would be to purge that power. Magic's punishment, he called it. He sighed. Death really didn't play fair. They'd all made fair bargains, but death always found a way to trip you up later, just like in the tale of the three brothers. John got up from the attic. His vision cleared slightly, the world shifting from pitch black to a blurry outline. As he came down the stairs, Bathilda watched him and sighed. Yoel, I think you should be with them. Among the three, only John felt out of place. But the times were different, she reminded him. John chuckled. Power brings many things. Money and rank are incidental. Followers and friends gather around you without you planning it. Bathilda blinked. Is that your idea? Power first, John said with a tiny bow and a smile. That's always been my approach. Bathilda seemed lost in thought. Her own great-nephew had been someone who chased power, too. After saying goodbye, John left Bathilda's house. He could now find his way around Godric's Hollow without relying on magic. Gale and Al had gone out together. No one noticed that Ariana, who usually stayed home, had slipped out as well. John walked to the stream. After a while, he felt eyes on him and glanced back. Someone was watching. "Hello," he called, smiling. "Can I help you with something?" The girl held a small bear to her chest and looked down, not answering, like a child with the world shut out. John only made out a blurred outline. He kept walking, but after a few steps, a headache flared. He looked back again. Under the summer sun, she still stood there. He tried once more. "Do you need help?" At the sound of his voice, she flinched like a startled child, but said nothing. John hesitated. The stream was tricky for an ordinary blind man, but less so for a wizard. He drew his wand and tapped it. The super sense spell awakened, taking in everything around him, every tiny detail. Crossing the water, he watched the outline by the bank. An emotion clung to her, fear, a tight, helpless terror. The nearer he came, the more that emotion swelled. John stopped. "Do you want my help?" There was no answer. He felt a magical disturbance, a presence, a very strong wizard. For a moment, a single thought passed through him, obscurial. He stepped back onto the bank. When he approached, Ariana shrank into herself, but did not flee. "Do you want to cross?" he asked softly. Even up close, he could only see an extremely faint outline, not enough to tell whether she was a boy or a girl. Chapter 494. John realized the child didn't want to be touched, so he handed over his wand. "If you want to cross, hold my wand," he said. One end of the long linden wand extended toward Ariana. She hesitated then, with extreme caution, pinched the tip of the wand between two fingers. John felt the faint pressure transmitted through the wood and stepped into the water first. For a second, he felt the wand release. Ariana had let go, and then she ran back the way she'd come. John watched her small figure recede and had no choice but to abandon the attempt. While searching the forest for other suitable trees, John came across a kappa, a creature from Asia he had never expected to see in Godric's Hollow. Its body offered nothing useful for wand cores or potion ingredients, so he let the frightened animal go. "Kappas drag people into the water and drown them," he muttered, stroking his chin. "There's hardly anyone around, so it shouldn't be a problem." He paused at the sound of voices on the far side of the stream and tapped his wand, activating the super sense spell. Through the spell, he saw two boys by the water, the taller one splashing the other, water running down his jaw to his collar, and the smaller boy retaliating. Two boys at play. John fell silent and turned away. "Let's pretend I didn't see anything," he thought, and headed back to Bathilda's house. He had been staying there for over 2 weeks now. Bathilda was a true homebody. If wizards didn't have to eat, she probably never would have left the house at all. John worried about money. Some potions were impossible to make in Godric's Hollow, which meant trips to Diagon Alley, and trips to Diagon Alley meant interaction with people. The fewer people he contacted, the less chance he'd alter the future. He thought bleakly of the dignified second king of Nocturne Alley, Johnny Silverhand, and the galleons that would one day matter to him. If he refined the Philosopher's Stone, the consequences would be monumental. That was not an option. Restricted from using the stone and from making too many personal contacts, he felt boxed in. Walking past his neighbor's house that afternoon, he expected to be watched as usual, but the watcher was gone. He made his way into Bathilda's kitchen and put his anxieties aside for the moment. Ariana, meanwhile, had bolted back to her room and curled up with her small bear, trembling. A terrible memory played behind her eyes, 3 older children forcing her into the water, pulling her under. She was terrified, and the objects on the shelves began to tremble as well. Her brother Al, returning home, saw that his sister was near a breaking point and rushed to comfort her. "It's all right, Ariana," he whispered, gathering her into a tight hug. Slowly, the shaking stopped. Al's face carried a fatigue that dulled the joy he had felt after becoming friends with Gale. His sister's fragile state felt like a wing clipped, keeping him from soaring alongside others. A few days later, Gale caught up with John. "You should come with us," the young boy urged. "It's very interesting." "He's an interesting man," Gale told his companions. "He's full of wisdom." "Wisdom's not what I chase," John replied lightly. The Sorting Hat had never once mentioned Ravenclaw traits when it put him in his house. Power mattered more to him now than cleverness. Gale was ambitious, a venomous sort who liked to impose his ideas on others. John recognized a familiar phrase when he heard it. Power above all, Gale said, echoing John's earlier remark. For Gale, that power meant wizards dominating muggles. For John, it meant the strong rising to the top. Gale wanted John to join his cause for the greater good. Al, too, was drawn into their plans, an equally bright boy held back by family and circumstance. John had no interest in their schemes. Changing the world isn't just talk, he said, folding away the items on the table with a light sweep of his wand. The neatly processed trinkets slid into their boxes. Al would be happy to see you, Gale added. We're going to the church today. When persuasion failed, Gale left. John put the boxes away, then took out his homemade eye drops and administered them. His eyes burned and felt dry. After a couple of blinks, the dullness vanished, and briefly, his pupils narrowed into vertical slits. He blinked again, and they were normal. He had been in Godric's Hollow almost a month. Time travel weighed on the body. Others had aged decades after returning. John felt the strain, but his long lifespan made the burden less obvious. June came quickly. Since his initial encounters, someone or something had been tailing him. Whenever he turned, it froze. Every time he reached that stream, the follower stopped and refused to cross. Today, he stopped at the water and turned to the child who had been shadowing him. "Are you still going to follow me?" he asked. Ariana skirted to the water's edge and halted. John sighed. "You want to cross, don't you?" he asked softly. He could sense the child's emotions, fragile and unstable, and didn't press too hard. She hesitated, then almost imperceptibly nodded. "All right, I'll take you across," he said. He beckoned her closer. Ariana stood beside him. He kept his distance, drew out his linden wand, and aimed it at the stream. "If you're afraid of water, make the water stop," he murmured. The wand rose, then swung downward, paved the way. Invisible blades sliced through the current. The stream parted slowly, revealing a slick, dry channel through the middle. John extended the wand toward Ariana. "Grab my wand. I'll take you across." Ariana stared at the dry path with trembling courage and carefully pinched the tip of the wand. John stepped forward and she followed. They walked across the exposed streambed. This time she did not let go. John smiled, patient and gentle. "Watch your footing," he warned. "Mind the rocks." She held the wand like it was her only anchor, her fear radiating from her grip, but he didn't try to yank it back. For someone so unstable, a sudden loss of contact could have sent her into complete panic. They moved deeper into the forest together. John stooped sometimes to pluck herbs and bring them to his nose to identify. With the small shadow following at his heels, he didn't mind the company. Occasionally, Ariana would stop dead, and John would stop as well, waiting until she could continue. She watched birds in the branches, rabbits bolt through the underbrush, and squirrels wrestle over nuts. The day warmed as they walked. When they returned to the stream, the parting had closed and the water flowed as if nothing had happened. John flicked his wand twice, and the water split again. He glanced down at the child, still clinging to the wand, and explained, "I need to make the water stop again." Ariana wouldn't let go. She needed something to hold on to, something dependable. John felt a headache coming on. He had brought trouble on himself, but he understood how fragile she was. He reached out a hand, careful, ready to help her across however she needed. Chapter 495. If you're scared, just hold my hand. Ariana looked down at the offered hand, then slowly let go of her wand. The small, tentative fingers of the girl closed around John's right hand, and he paused. She didn't take his whole palm, only his pinky, but the touch steadied her. John smiled faintly and reopened his wand stream, guiding the calming Ariana across. When they reached the far bank, she did not let go, so John had no choice but to lead her home. Only after they reached the yard, where the scent of morning glories filled the air, did Ariana finally release his hand. John watched her go inside, then headed next door to Bathilda's house. He did not know that Ariana's outing had left Al frantic. Al had returned from his usual walk with Gale, wearing a smile that was not his usual at home. The oppressive gloom of the house had nearly stolen his ability to smile at all. Out in town with Gale, he was almost carefree. Gale was an engaging companion, charming, quick-witted, and they shared a rapport Al relished. Bathilda was glad to see him find some joy and entertained their friendship. Al clung to the feeling, greedy for more of it. He and Gale had confided everything to each other in the church, from magic to family, and eventually to Ariana. His sister was a knot in his chest, a burden of responsibility. When Al arrived back, he found Ariana's room empty. Panic flared. He called her name, voice tight with the memory of the past, when she was 6, when things had gone wrong. Ariana was dangerous now. A few weeks ago, an uncontrolled outburst had ended with their mother dead. She was an unstable, unpredictable patient. Ariana! He searched the house frantic and nearly bolted outside when he saw her returning. He hurried over, ready to demand answers, then stopped. His sister's usually sullen face carried a faint brightness. Observant, he noticed damp mud on her shoes. "You went to the stream, Ariana?" he asked quietly, trying to smother the panic under a colder tone. Ariana nodded slowly. Surprise softened Al's handsome blue eyes. She had always been terrified of water after that attack. She'd never gone to the stream before. Even when he had taken her there, they'd stayed on the grassy bank watching lambs graze. This change, Ariana venturing to the stream, meant she was opening up. It was a good thing, but Al was also furious. He had been so careful to keep her from going out. Now, because of his oversight, she had not only left the house, but had gone to the one place she feared most. He could only imagine what might have happened. Ariana went to her room and looked out the window with a faint, hopeful expression, as if awaiting the white-haired young man to pass by. John, however, had been swept away by Gale. Gale hadn't given up on his idea of getting John to go out with him. John wanted to refuse, but Gale was adept at using people's goodwill. He told Bathilda he was taking John and the troubled Al out for a bit. Bathilda agreed and told them to enjoy themselves. Gale shot a triumphant look at John, as if to say, "See, don't resist." He even winked, but he'd forgotten John was blind, so the gesture meant nothing. John had no choice but to leave the attic with Gale, casually flinging a copy of the Tales of Beetle the Bard, left in his room for who knew how long, toward Gale. They went next door to Al's house, where Al had been reluctant to leave because of Ariana's condition. The yard greeted them with morning glories and other floral scents. John's second meeting with the red-haired Al. Al was pleased to see Gale, and he greeted John warmly as well. It was John's first time in the house with the climbing flowers. Al invited them into his attic room. Sunlight poured through the slanted window. Gale had been there before. Many times he and Al had stayed up late, talking on the same bed. John picked up a book, and by feeling the handwriting, Al identified the paper. "This is from Transfiguration Today," he said. "I published there when I was at school." Then, puzzled, he asked, "Are you a Hogwarts student?" He'd learned John's identity, obviously a Hogwarts student, but Al had never seen him at school. Although Al had graduated, John looked only 2 years younger. "A 6th year at Hogwarts," John said with a small laugh as he closed the book. "You can't know everyone in all 4 houses." Al stared, trying to read his face. John, calm and unbothered, added, "The Slytherin common room looks out onto the Black Lake." "But the merpeople love to frighten students," Al said. "My friends have been terrified a few times." Hearing that, Al's suspicion eased. Only someone from Slytherin would know such details, and Slytherins and Gryffindors didn't mix much, so it wasn't strange Al hadn't met him. The questioning ended. Al needed to tend to his sister. He had a performance planned for her, a puppet show youngsters loved, and as hosts, John and Gale could watch. Al was skilled at transfiguration. With a light wave of his wand, a box of muggle puppets opened and the characters marched onto a tiny stage. "Ariana," he called. Ariana seemed aware of the show and came to watch. She barely reacted to Gale, but she looked straight at John. "This is my sister, Ariana," Al told them. "This is Gale. He's been to our house, and this is Yol." "Yol," Ariana echoed. Al had expected silence, but this time Ariana spoke. She hugged her teddy tightly and stared at John. He smiled. "Hello, Ariana," he said softly. She sat beside her brother, and Al put his feelings aside to begin. He waved his wand and set the puppets moving, telling the story of the 3 brothers from the Tales of Beetle the Bard. When he was small, Al had dreamed of stealing the invisibility cloak the 3rd brother received, imagining mischief behind his parents' backs. Growing older hadn't diminished the wish, only changed its purpose. Now he wanted the cloak for Ariana. Her condition had worsened with age. Al even had to lay protective magic over the yard to stop Ariana from leveling the house during a fit. Those cheap imitation cloaks would fail under her magical surges. Still, he knew the three brothers' story was just that, a story, and he had read the fairy tale many times. As the puppets enacted the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the cloak, Ariana watched intently. Gale watched too, eyes glinting with an ambition that matched the tale. "Deathly Hallows," he murmured under his breath. John seemed to be looking at nothing. How could a nearly blind man watch a puppet show? He said nothing, but he didn't need to. He tapped the ground lightly and activated a super sense spell. Through it, he could see the play. The Tale of the Three Brothers. He had authority, in his own quiet way, because he carried a resurrection stone. He had seen the Elder Wand used to shatter a domain, and he knew who had owned the invisibility cloak back at school. Gale, quick to read people, felt the stir of desire in Al as the puppet showed the brothers and their gifts. "Al," he asked, "do you want the invisibility cloak?" "Who wouldn't?" Al answered, hardly concealing his longing. Gale turned to John. "What about you? What do you want?" John considered for a moment. He already had the resurrection stone. The cloak seemed of limited use to him. "The Elder Wand," he said. He had watched Dumbledore use it. Its amplifying power fascinated him. The Philosopher's Stone could boost power too, but not to that level. If he had had enough allies, then he might have snatched the Elder Wand himself instead of teaming up with Voldemort. Gale, meanwhile, declared bluntly, "I want the Resurrection Stone. You can build an army with that." 3 different wants. Al wanted the cloak so he could fly free. Gale wanted the stone to raise a force. John wanted the wand to magnify his strength. They lined up like the three brothers, power, pride, and humility. John scoffed. "It's just a story," he said. "Stories are unreal." "You're wrong, John," Gale replied with a grin that made the words dangerous. "What if I told you we could get one of them tonight?" For a moment, John imagined ambushing himself to steal the stone, but the truth didn't betray him. Gale meant something else. Al's voice tightened with excitement. Gale produced a chain. On it hung the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, a triangle enclosing a circle bisected by a vertical line. Sunlight caught the metal. "I've been searching," Gale said, "for Ignotus Peverell, one of the three brothers. I think I've found him." Ignotus Peverell, the owner of the invisibility cloak. Al's heart thundered. He looked at Gale, disbelieving. Gale had always been ambitious, but this was bolder than Al expected. John watched the scene with a steady face. The puppet show stopped moving. Ariana looked up, and seeing her stillness, John touched his wand to keep the story going. He knew the third brother's tale by heart, the one who used the cloak to evade death. "That's just a story," Al murmured again. Gale shrugged. "History of Magic records the Elder Wand. Bloody things are in History of Magic." Well, John thought, if the Elder Wand was real, why couldn't the other 2 heirlooms be? He turned his attention to Gale's chain. "Where did you find it?" he asked. Gale's smile widened. "A church cemetery, the tomb of Ignotus Peverell." John's interest was piqued. "I'm in," he said casually. Al hesitated. A night adventure with friends was tempting, but a tomb? Gale taunted him. How could a Gryffindor be afraid of adventure? In the end, Al nodded. They decided to go after dark. John made fun of the cloak's reputation. "It's not what you think. If it were truly perfect, Dumbledore wouldn't have seen through Harry." He also knew where a famous cloak had ended up, in the Potter family. Then, with a small show of disdain, he tapped his head with his wand, like cracking an egg. In a blink, his body melted away under their eyes. "Something you can do with a disillusionment charm, and you still want an invisibility cloak?" John said. His disillusionment charm wasn't perfect invisibility, more like optical camouflage, but his skill was high enough that he vanished completely. This was why Gale had wanted him here, as bait for a larger scheme, to tie them into something that might change the world. "Invisibility isn't disappearance," John added. "In my opinion, the cloak is far less useful than the Elder Wand." "Power is the foundation of standing," Gale said, though his enthusiasm had softened. John surprised Al. "Does the cloak really give you freedom?" he asked Al, looking straight at him. Al glanced at his sister Ariana and felt uncertain. In the tale, the third brother used the cloak to hide and spent his life in retreat. John stretched out a hand and watched it with the blur of his sight. If the Elder Wand were invincible, it wouldn't keep changing hands, he murmured. Power is supposed to increase potential, but stories lie about absolutes. Golden flames crackled into being around his hand and then shaped into a small, brilliant dragon. The sight confirmed something to Gale. John was not a soaring eagle like him. He was a dragon, hungry, dangerous, and capable of devouring everything in its path. Ariana leaned forward, tentative, and reached out to touch the dragon. The flame winked out the moment her fingers neared. "Where did you learn to do that?" Gale asked, stunned. "Words are one thing," John replied, expression unchanged, "but I'm especially interested when legends cross into reality." His real curiosity about Ignotus was practical. He wondered how death had let someone evade him for so long. Gale told them what he knew. Ignotus's tomb was in a churchyard, tucked in Godric's Hollow. John shrugged. "Sounds interesting. I'll come." His agreement shifted the decision to Al. Al watched Ariana cling to John in a way he hadn't seen with anyone except himself and his brother. She hugged her teddy bear and stayed close. John could feel the child's unease and fragility. John compared her silently to the Longbottoms, victims of severe, mind-shattering curses. Ariana wasn't broken that way, but trauma had made her sensitive and fragile. She was the same age as Astoria, but never went to school. "You like being with him," John observed to Al. Al's impression of John warmed. John looked at him and asked, softly, "Do you want to get away from here?" Al hesitated, then shook his head. "No, You're talented," John said, eyes flat but seeing too deeply. "But because of your sister, you've been kept home. You won't be content." Al fell quiet. His secret had been peeled back. John's awareness might have been unnerving to others, but he used it gently. He laid a hand near Ariana and let a thread of mind magic weave through the air, a quiet spell to soothe. His voice gained that reassuring, practiced quality the spell needed. The tightness in Ariana's chest eased. She relaxed, wrapped her teddy tighter, and before long drifted into sleep. "What did you do?" Al whispered. "A spell," John said, smiling very faintly as he kept his hand near Ariana's. "It gives her a sense of safety." Al looked at him, searching. Ariana gripped the wand tip in her small fingers, like a crossing board that made her feel secure. By 8 o'clock, she was asleep. The three of them left the house, stepped past the marigolds along the path, and made their way toward the churchyard behind Godric's Hollow. Chapter 497. 100 years ago, there weren't as many entertainments as in later generations. Nights were for drinking at a pub or finding a spot outdoors to sleep. The village was quiet under a bright moon and sparse stars. They skirted the church and made their way into the cemetery. Overgrown plants climbed a rusty fence, and the path between the graves looked like a road of the dead, a scatter of tombstones rising at different heights. In years to come, a couple would be buried here, killed in Godric's Hollow by that sudden green light, their deaths leaving a powerful legacy. The arrival of the three of them did nothing to disturb the hush of that place. They moved through the graves with reverence. "The dead cannot be brought back," Al said, reading a line on a tombstone as he bent over it. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Al stopped when he saw the name. Kendra Dumbledore. Gale noticed the stone too. The wild energy that usually rode him fell away, replaced by solemn quiet as he mourned the occupant of that grave. "Someone you know?" John asked. His eyesight was poor, and the letters on the stone were blurry to him. Al's voice dropped. "She's my mother. She died not long ago." Sadness moved through them. "May she rest in peace," John said, and he produced his wand, leaving a small bouquet of white flowers on the base of the stone. Al knelt, fingertips tracing the cool marble. Gale stood beside him without his usual swagger, simply a friend sharing a loss. 10 minutes later, Al rose. The blow of his mother's death was heavy, but it had given him a hard, steady sense of responsibility. He glanced up, a longing in his eyes for something else, the invisibility cloak. "Let's go," Al said. Gale read the look and understood. Two people with difficult fates, both walking the same path. They exchanged a look that made John want to push them forward. "I think we should be going," he said. Gale led them deeper into the graveyard. At the very back, they found another tombstone. It bore the name Ignotus Peverell. It was a strange, uncanny feeling to see a figure from legend in the flesh. "We might find the invisibility cloak here," Gale said seriously. Gale had come to Godric's Hollow for the Deathly Hallows. Finding Ignotus's grave seemed to confirm his hopes. John, however, was certain they wouldn't find the cloak in a tomb. The cloak had been passed down through the Potter family, descendants of Ignotus Peverell. Looking at the stone, John felt his enthusiasm cool. "There doesn't seem to be anything dramatic about this one," he said flatly. Gale and Al, who had been excited, looked deflated. Gale shot John a resentful glance. He would have preferred not to bring this skeptic along. John touched his wand to the tombstone anyway. Specialis Revelio. A faint shimmer of magic washed from the stone. "I think we can leave now," John said. "It's an ordinary grave, humble, like its owner." He put his wand away as he spoke. The cloak would not be here. The Potters, as descendants of Ignotus, had kept it. John looked up at the moon. In his blurred vision, it filled much of the sky. "At least the night is beautiful," he added, "and we gained something." They all glanced upward. Gale's face showed resentment, Al's regret. Their lead had disappeared again, but Gale trusted John. There was something convincing about the white-haired youth, a steady certainty. The night passed. After that, Gale shifted tactics and began dragging John into more of his and Al's affairs. They discussed magic, learned from one another. John suspected Gale hoped to extract things from him, artifacts like the Goblet of Immortal Flame, but John tried not to interfere too much in this world. He nonetheless became a sort of guardian for Ariana. Her small fingers often held his wand. It soothed her, and he allowed it. Healing, then, John thought at one point, his mind turning to the possibility of using mind magic to help Ariana. The idea flickered through his head like a dangerous light and was promptly suppressed. Changing a person, changing the future, could alter everything. He chased the thought away. Then Al's brother returned. The name crackled in John's mind, familiar, unsettling, and any hope he had that he could move through this era unseen narrowed further. Al's brother had arrived in a storm of temper. Hogwarts was on holiday, Gale told him, and with that news arrived the annoying, goat-like boy from next door, Aberforth. Hot-tempered and restless, he and Al came to blows as soon as he returned because of Ariana. He was rough and blunt, the opposite of the brother Al should have had. No surprise Gale disliked him, even though he was closer in age to the goat-like Aberforth than to Al. John didn't much care about the growing closeness between Gale and Al. They were compatible in their own combustible way. His thoughts kept returning to his own problems, healing his eyes and finding a way back. He'd been experimenting with time magic and soul magic, thinking that colliding the two might let him jump. He relied on his time sand, but time travel had its limits. He wasn't sure whether the world would eventually notice a stowaway and eject him, and if so, when that would happen. Without a time-turner ticket, there was always that risk. He put a few eye drops in. This time, his eyes held moisture. Blinking, the world sharpened enough that he could make out details if he held something close to his nose. A small improvement. "That's good news," he murmured, and his lips lifted. Bathilda, the old spinster, had been trying to photograph the group. She wanted to take his picture too, but John refused. He didn't want to leave any trace in this era. Bathilda ended up with photos of Gale and Al only. Passing the neighbor's house, John lowered his head and leaned over a flower bed. 3 inches away, a rose was suddenly crisp and close. A wary voice snapped at him. He turned and saw a short, red-haired silhouette by the doorway. "Who are you?" the voice demanded. John blinked. "Al?" The man was clearly not Al. He was much shorter. He frowned, looking sour. "Who's Al?" "I'm Aberforth. What are you doing on my doorstep?" "Aberforth?" John repeated, staring at the redhead. He quickened his steps and came closer. Aberforth startled, backing up and drawing his wand. John rubbed his aching brow and tried a different tack. "You wouldn't happen to be Aberforth Dumbledore, would you?" he asked, hoping for a different answer. Aberforth kept his wand ready and replied bluntly, "Apparently." John exhaled a long, rueful sigh. He had been trying, as much as possible, not to interfere with influential people. Instead, he had found the most influential family in the village. The familiarity of the name Ariana suddenly made sense. He'd only been tricking himself into thinking it was a coincidence. The fragile plan to move through this past unseen and untouched had just taken another serious hit. Chapter 498. The Dumbledore name could not be faked. A goat suddenly emerged beside Aberforth. No one ever understood why he was so fond of goats. Even his old schoolmates had been puzzled by it. "Ariana, don't!" Aberforth cried out. It was Ariana who had run outside. That left Aberforth stunned. She never left the house unless he took her. Now she had darted forward and was pinching his wand between her tiny fingers. Aberforth wanted to sheath his wand at once to avoid hurting her, but the motion only increased her fear. John noticed this and drew his own wand. Ariana, still clutching Aberforth's wand, reached out and pinched the tip of John's wand as well, as if being led. John explained softly, "This will make her feel safer." Aberforth stared blankly at his sister, who obediently followed John's lead. "Hello, Aberforth," John said, once he realized who lived next door. "My name is Yoel. I'm staying with Aunt Bathilda." "Aunt Bathilda?" Aberforth blinked. This was their first proper meeting. As Ariana's older brother, he bristled at the sight of her clinging to a stranger. She was supposed to be his favorite. That this young man could win her trust so easily offended him. He was having trouble reconciling this polite visitor with the greasy-faced owner of the Hog's Head Inn he knew from town. "You were a coward running an inn, but a heavy hitter back at school, weren't you?" John's gaze on Aberforth was odd. He didn't drink at the Hog's Head and had never seen the older Aberforth pull a wand on anyone. Yet here Aberforth was, aiming his wand at him for merely passing by. Did Aberforth think that using magic as a minor would keep him out of Azkaban? Wait, Azkaban? John's eyes flashed. He'd almost forgotten. Azkaban was still the prison guarded by Dementors, soul-suckers that did a thorough job. Thinking of that, John softened. "You may be dense, but you've got good instincts," he said, clapping Aberforth on the shoulder. Aberforth shuddered, and rage erupted like a volcano. He looked ready to kill. This young man had a sort of Gryffindor recklessness. If you won't back down, fight. When Albus returned, he found Aberforth shoved against the wall and being hit. Aberforth was bruised and swollen, trying stubbornly to answer back, when John landed another blow in the stomach. "I just have poor eyesight. That doesn't mean my body is weak," Aberforth managed through clenched teeth before doubling over in retching pain. John still held his wand, handling the volatile goat boy with one hand. Seeing her brother beaten, Ariana gripped the wand all the tighter. John noticed and soothed her. "We're just fooling around, right, Aberforth?" Aberforth propped himself against the wall. Despite the pain, he forced a strained smile and said, "That's right, we're just playing." Ariana calmed. John saw Albus return, this young man teased by Gale, the future Dumbledore. John called to him, almost casually, "Albus, what do you think makes a beard look good?" Albus stared, uncomprehending. He had no idea he'd one day wear a silver beard. Aberforth went on the offensive again, accusing Albus of not taking proper care of their sister and of letting a stranger get close to her. Albus could only endure the accusations in silence. John pondered the word stranger. Did Aberforth mean him? Had the blows muddled the boy's mind? Ariana's grip tightened reflexively, but John used a soft tone and a touch of mind magic to reassure her. "It's okay. He's just worried about you." The spell eased her fear. Faced with the trembling girl, John felt an unexpected tug at his conscience. Dumbledore's sister would not live long enough to reach John's time. Even if he could heal her now, doing so might change the future in ways he shouldn't. Still, he couldn't help laying a warm hand on Ariana's head. "You're a pitiful thing, Ariana," he murmured. "Suffering isn't something you can bargain with." Ariana didn't understand the words fully. She only felt how warm the hand was. The argument between Aberforth and Albus petered out. Gale watched the scene, wisely keeping his distance so things wouldn't escalate further. He looked thoughtful. He wanted to take Albus away. The time they'd spent together had shown Gale the pull between them. Both of them wanted to strive for something greater, yet Albus was bound by family. Gale thought the greater good shouldn't be restrained by such ties. "Albus, you should be selfish for once," Gale told himself, deciding he would act. He hadn't found the Deathly Hallows, but he had found another treasure. Later, John returned to the attic and found a letter folded there. He brought it up close. It was from Gale, asking him to meet in the barn. "Is it time for a showdown?" John wondered, fingers stroking the paper. Gale wanted honesty. Both men recognized that neither was simple. After more than a month together, John suspected that if someone like Gale didn't die young, he would someday make a name for himself, perhaps even cross paths with the young Dumbledore. John sighed. He was getting in deeper than he intended. The next day he hesitated, but he went to the barn. If he erased their memories afterward, the future might stay intact. Besides, he wanted to hear what these two young men would say. On the second floor of the barn, a mirror stood, and Gale was already waiting. Gale turned slowly. "Do you want to keep going on like this, Yoel?" he asked, his voice sharp as a knife. Mediocrity was not the fate of someone brilliant. "I thought you'd wait for Albus," John said. He hadn't seen Albus yet. "He's having a row with that goat boy," Gale sneered. "But answer me, Yoel. Do you want to keep hiding?" "Hiding?" John repeated. Gale's eyes flashed. "Why should we hide like rats? We can change things." "Change how?" John asked, curious despite himself. "To make wizards live better." Gale spread his hand, his sleeve fluttering. "Why should wizards shrink away? We have the power to change things." "You are powerful, Yoel. So powerful I can't read you. I need you." He spoke each word with conviction. "Join us. Do it for the greater good. Let wizards live openly in the world." John listened to the pitch that followed. Why should muggles live unrestrained, taking most of the world's resources, while wizards are forced to hide like sewer rats? Why should those with power be forced into the shadows? He wanted to change everything. He wanted to overturn the statute of secrecy. At such a young age, Gale already carried that awareness, an ambition that was remarkable. John had to admit it. In terms of sheer ambition, Gale was formidable. John had never once thought to change the statute. It wasn't cowardice, it was realism. Wizards couldn't simply rewrite the world. Hide or be destroyed. That was the inevitable choice. So when Gale spoke of revolution, John dismissed it as a dream, a fantastical Babylon that stoked endless imagination but existed only in people's fantasies. "Do you know what hunters are?" John didn't answer Gale's plea directly. He asked a question instead. "Hunters?" Gale blinked, taken aback. At that moment, Al, who had been arguing with Aberforth, arrived at the barn. Gale's words had painted grand scenes for him, lighting a fire in two young hearts. Like a slow poison, those images had nurtured and expanded the longing in Al's chest. To change a world where wizards hid in the shadows, to free Ariana from confinement, to let his family spread their wings. The vision made people obsessive, made them desperate. He believed that two exceptionally talented young wizards could make it happen. Aberforth couldn't imagine such things. His small world encompassed goats and the routine of a simple life. Gale wanted John in their cause, and Al understood why. In the brief time they'd known each other, Al had seen in John equal talent and intelligence. For reasons Al couldn't explain, John had been blind, but his enormous magical power spoke of his strength. Gale was like a golden eagle, soaring and alluring but carrying a deadly charm. John was a dragon lying in the depths, coiled and enormous, a snow-capped mountain that made one ache to awaken it. I wanted to know what might happen if such a force joined them. When John mentioned hunters, Al realized the gravity at once. When a hunter walks through the forest and hears a rustle in the brush, his first reaction is to pull the trigger, John said. Even without sight, his voice cut straight to the bone. "Muggles are the hunters," he said, "and we're the prey." The single word prey felt like a layer of skin torn away to reveal raw, tender flesh beneath. It made both young wizards shudder. "Gosh, muggles are weak," Gale protested. "They're just ordinary people. They can't even do magic." "They're intellectually capable, and they have massive numbers," John interrupted. "If we were living 1,000 years ago, maybe your dream could work." "But how many wizards are there now?" John asked. 1,000? 10,000? 100,000? And how many muggles? Billions. That sheer number built the basis for Muggle dominance. John drew his wand, and a mist unfurled around them. Within it came the sounds of battle, thunder, explosions, the whine of engines. He showed them a vision, a fighter jet ripping across the sky, a hail of bullets that could take dozens of lives in an instant, tanks, steel beasts that rolled through the world, crushing houses with a single shell. A small, fast bullet moved swifter than many charms. Wizards, too, bled and died if their brains were ruptured. Whether it was a Vada Kedavra or a high-caliber round, the result was the same. Both could be fatal. A blast to the left eye or the right eye didn't care whether the body belonged to a wizard. Yes, wizards had amazing powers, an innate edge, but the destructive capacity of ordinary people was magnitudes greater. Scene after scene of Muggle warfare left Gale and Al speechless. Could one wizard take out one Muggle? 2? 100? Gale asked, voice hollow. 100 Muggles are enough to take down one wizard, John said quietly. Hogwarts was founded to protect young wizards from Muggle persecution, Al. He looked at the younger man with a calm intensity. We have always been the prey. There are many hunters with guns. The best we can do is make as little noise as possible so the hunters don't aim at us, John continued. The truth was brutal. Wizards couldn't displace Muggles in the tide of population and technology. Hearing the cold calculus, the two hot-hearted youths felt their ideals crumble. Gale fell silent, struggling to accept it. Al's mouth felt glued shut. Bitter taste and humiliation rose in his throat. They had spent so many nights together, railing at the future and lamenting the plight of wizards. They wanted to change things. Now a man with a butcher's bluntness had come and cut the dream apart. Destroying an ideal was crueler than killing a person. John wielded a cleaver on their fantasy. All this means you don't want change? Gale's voice sharpened. The cynicism in his gaze had receded, replaced by a resolve. Change? John laughed, a dry sound. We are different, Gale. He waved his wand, and the mist and the visions vanished. He chuckled softly. Power decides everything. Power is supreme. I don't care about the political squabble between wizards and muggles. In my eyes, they're all people. Only the strong have the right to stand. Victory belongs to me. John's philosophy struck them hard. He was a thorough Slytherin, magnetic in a different, darker way than Gale. It was a charm that made people unconsciously gravitate toward him. Power is supreme. The victor is king. In John's worldview, defeat wasn't a possibility. He had always been a kind of sovereign in his own right, destined to rule over others. Gale murmured to himself, power is supreme. If you had enough power, you could move the world. Enough victories could make Muggles bend the knee. An individual was always limited. He needed followers. Something ignited in Gale. Like an idealistic man who accepted the likelihood of death, knowing a hunter's rifle might end him, he still wanted to find out if he were lion or rabbit. If ordinary wizard power wasn't enough, they'd use something stronger, the power of the Deathly Hallows. All thought of his sister, of the stubborn younger brother who carried their family into uncertainty. The weight of responsibility made it hard to breathe. He preferred to believe in the dreamscape they'd woven than to be trapped in this narrow life. He was a Gryffindor at heart, restless, craving adventure, willing to die for a cause. In that instant, the two hearts drew closer. Before them stood a mountain of John's making, an immense force that pressed down, stifling yet drawing them in. Join us, y'all, Gale said, reaffirming his conviction and extending the invitation again. Let us become that victory. Fate, like a storm, whispered that resistance was futile. The warriors wanted to charge into it, to shout defiance into the dim world. It was carnival and madness and a desperate fight. Those who died for their ideals deserved respect, not scorn. Al stepped beside Gale, resolute. Let's do it together, he said. They wanted John to be their voice, to make wizards hear them, to make hunters tremble at the sounds in the undergrowth. But they were wrong. John was not the man to stand beside them in the gale. He was the gale. We are not meant to be together, he said, shaking his head. Separated by nearly 100 years, how could I run with you? He turned to Al. His calm words carried a destructive force. Are you going to run away, Al? Al blinked, confused. John's voice dropped. Steady and heavy, your sister, your family. Chapter 500. His words left Al visibly shaken. You chose the invisibility cloak. You chose to run away. John's ability to read people's hearts hit Al like a storm. Face yourself, Al. John turned to leave. His voice drifted back over his shoulder. It was Gale who gave you the key, so you could undo your family's chains and escape the suffocating responsibilities. But what about the person inside you? John barely made it out of the barn without breaking into a cold sweat. I almost couldn't bring it back, he muttered. One reckless impulse had nearly crushed two young wizards. He'd managed to smooth things over afterwards with his power above all philosophy, but the question still nagged at him. What had they been doing in the barn? He didn't realize how much his parting words had unsettled Al. As John stepped into the courtyard, he spotted a small figure covering her ears. Ariana. She was crouched there, trembling. The shouting from inside had scared her. John felt a sudden, unfamiliar helplessness. Ariana's later fate made his chest ache, an obscurial, forced to suppress the magic that lived inside her, an inner torture more dangerous than any enemy. Her whole future felt pinched and broken off, like a flower never meant to bloom. She never had the years to learn to speak for herself. She was gone by 14. It was a small, pitiful life. "What are you doing out here?" John asked softly. At the sound of his voice, Ariana lowered her hands. On the ground lay a tiny toy bear. John picked it up, brushed the dust from its fur, and handed it back to her. She accepted it, and then, hesitant, precious, offered him an unopened flower she'd found in the yard. "For you," she said. The bud looked fragile and doomed, like Ariana, beautiful but with no future to speak of. She didn't understand these things. She only wanted to give John something good. He hesitated for a moment before placing his palm beneath the bud. Slowly, the closed flower unfurled. Where it had been dying, there bloomed a perfect white blossom. Ariana gasped. "It's beautiful." "Thank you," John said, smiling. "I like this gift, Ariana." Something like a real smile lit her face. For a time, her fear slipped away. He tucked the white flower into his chest, where its purity seemed to steady him. Aberforth watched from the doorway with his usual wary, sullen expression. Gruff and stubborn, he always stayed close to his sister. For all his temper, he loved her fiercely. "How's your painting going, Aberforth?" John asked, trying to lighten the mood. Aberforth muttered and looked away. John noticed the younger brother curled on the ground, clutching his stomach. Ariana was squatted at his side, poking him anxiously with a fallen wand. The little household had its rough edges. Aberforth, the hot-tempered goat of a boy, surprised John with a talent for painting. It was likely how he communicated with Ariana, his brushstrokes a kind of conversation when she couldn't speak. One brother made puppets, the other painted. Both found ways to reach her. After the barn incident, Gale and Al kept coming back. They wanted John to join them. He refused every time. The younger pair took to following him around with a camera, trying to get a photograph. John dodged them so often it became a game. Aberforth, meanwhile, simmered like a powder keg, ready to blow. Weeks drifted by. John's sight had improved enough to make out people at close range, though the world remained stubbornly black and white. The house was quieter than usual that day. Gale and Al, notably absent, plotting something else perhaps. Bathilda sent out an owl and was running interviews with the papers to bring in money. John had his own plans. He wanted to go to Azkaban to try to catch a few dementors for materials to refine the soul potion. That trip required preparation, and he hoped to leave soon. He found Ariana again by the stream. Illicit arguing murmured from inside, Aberforth arguing with his brother, no doubt. Ariana had grown very attached to John. She clung to him now like a kitten, frightened of being abandoned. He led her with the tip of his wand and sat beside her at the water's edge. His vision narrowed to slits. He blinked. "Too bad," he said. "I still can't see clearly." He let out a soft sigh. "It's been almost 2 months since I've been here." Ariana held the bear in one hand and the wand in the other, watching him anxiously. "You should know. I'm not from here, Ariana." "Ah," John said. "I'm leaving soon." He told her, gently, that he planned to go to Azkaban to try to capture dementors and distill what he needed for the soul potion. Before he left, he wanted her to learn to express herself. He opened his palm and the white flower, her gift, appeared there. He returned it to her. "Equivalent exchange, Ariana," he said. "This is for you." Ariana let go of the wand and took the flower carefully, as if it might shatter. A brilliant, shy smile broke across her face. Through the time they'd spent together, something inside her had started to open. John tapped his wand and coaxed more small white blossoms to grow into a wreath for her hair. "Have a good dream tonight, Ariana." When he reached out his wand, Ariana didn't take it. Instead, she gripped his finger. Her eyes were wet with reluctance. She didn't want him to leave. She began. "Let me be your eyes," John finished, watching her. He knew his sight needed fixing. She knew it too. But she simply didn't want him to go. For a moment, his chest tightened with something like pity and something else he didn't want to name. She was listening to him with everything she had, trying so hard to change. "Thank you," he said, giving her a small, self-effacing smile. For everything. He let her hold his hand as he walked her back to the house. On the doorstep, Aberforth waited. Seeing Ariana smile seemed to stagger him. It had been so long since he'd seen her like this. Ariana hesitated, then released John's hand and ran toward the place that, in its own terrible way, would claim her life. Aberforth turned and led her inside, watching her closely. Before John could step away, he heard the young man murmur, "Thank you, Yoel." As they parted, Aberforth's eyes searched John's face, a question packed into one brief look. "Are you like them too?" he asked, meaning perhaps were John and the others of the same sort of outsider, the same kind of dangerous potential that hovered at the edges of their grim little world. John only nodded and walked on, the white flower pinned near his heart, the courtyard's silence falling behind him.